And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. What a fantastic crowd we have out there already. Of course, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, today you can feel it. 1010, episode 110, pure esoterica.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
You know, there's lots of different offices of study on this program. Politics, deep politics, steganography, esoterica, the mystery schools. Certainly the deeper importance of certain historical figures, etc. But tonight we're going deep into the esoteric to discover the identity of one Amilius, identified originally in the Edgar Cayce Readings during the 1930s, and subsequently quite a history there back through theosophy and anthroposophy. We're going to be exploring this through the figure of Edgar Cayce and Rudolf Steiner and the work that they left, and an early incarnation of Edgar Cayce's named RATA, who was the high priest in Egypt in 10,500 BC. And in that period, he was overseeing the Giza Plateau. So we're going to get into all that tonight and what his secret was carrying over from this appearance of Amilius, who we're going to realize as the spiritual leader of the children of the Law of One back in Atlantis. This is the Amilius group versus the Sons of Belial, which is basically a large Black Magician outfit that got hold of the technology in Atlantis during that period and caused several destructions there. There's a big replay of history going on, of course. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
When I look at it, I think to myself, these are all Atlanteans in play and the darkest types. But if you go back into those readings, there are very specific kind of warnings in the Cayce readings about these groups of Atlanteans coming back and facing the same hurdle where they caused destruction last time. They have an opportunity to do something else, but there's free will involved. So we're in that same clash of ideas, clash of emotions, clash of histories, clash of morals, and clash of vision. So this is where we're going to be going deep tonight on this. And I want to remind you, with all the intense censorship that we're seeing just across the board, especially on these doctors who are trying to share. They're really brave. I think we've been seeing so many brave ones sharing information on this while their entire community, the establishment, the medical establishment, just trying to call them heretics. I mean, this is it.
This
really
is a cult. More and more people are calling it that, and I think it's totally accurate.
No question about it. And the thing is, we have to understand that we stand in this deep work in a severe minority. It's like a lonely voice out there. And the work that we do, even on a certain level, has to be ridiculed. It's the nature of the field and the moment in time. But across the board, those brave people that are standing up are going to face the same type of ridicule. And we can go back and look actually at the work of Steiner and Blavatsky, who are widely ridiculed in their period in time. So the brave voices stand up anyway. That's the way it works. There is no acceptance by the broader group. That might come 100 years later. As Steiner said, if the object of anthroposophy fails in 1920, in 2020, that window opens up again, and in fact it has, and here we are. But I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com. We have a free newsletter there for you where we can stay in touch with each other, and this is going to be crucial going forward. And basically, you just get this newsletter about once a week telling you what shows we have coming up for you. We have many shows, including some surprise shows coming up and some fantastic interviews coming up for October and November. We're coming to you here on a Sunday night right before Columbus Day, and they're running the Boston Marathon 6 months late.
I don't have a good feeling about it tomorrow.
Interesting. I can tell you that the vibe is off for it. This is an April event, and the fact that they put it off in the first place was odd. We have a very strange history here in Boston with the marathon, as many know, from 2013, and hopefully they're not there's no shenanigans going on. But I will say that the 1010 piece is feeling very strongly like we're looking at a phase of things, and this happens once in a while, where we can get kind of almost like a cosmic snapshot of what's going on, which can be very valuable and inform all kinds of sort of down-to-earth deductions on the nature of the situation. Of course, we'll be doing many shows on the kind of X State of the Union side. Okay. Also, in the second half of the program, we're going to be taking your questions, and Miss Olivia is going to be putting those together. You can ask those questions now there in the ideas room. It's great to see everyone. How's the temperature out there?
Good. I think people are excited that we have a show tonight on 1010, and this is X series number 110, right?
Yes, This is the grand confluence. And that was purely accidental, but quite significant, I feel. There's also an interesting thing, I would say, in general. When we get into October, it's naturally open. This is why Halloween is there. When you get into that fall period, you're looking at a kind of esoteric overlay.
That's true.
It's like these things open up. And supposedly the original reason that we have Halloween is because that is the date that Atlantis sank, the final destruction of Atlantis. Yes. So that's the echo back there in the past. And we're going to deal with a few echoes tonight. The first one I want to deal with is the death ray. And the death ray is something that comes up in Cayce's work when he's describing a meeting that takes place in Atlantis. And he gives the date, which is rare in the Cayce readings, when he's talking about Atlantis going back through that Akashic history. And of course, Edgar Cayce was the incredible sleeping prophet psychic who gave readings over a course of 40 years with incredible accuracy, and largely gave medical readings. But thank God that mixed in with all those medical readings are very significant esoteric and what they called life readings, where he would go into the past lives of individuals. And many of them had been involved. Some of the greatest people in the world came to Cayce for readings, including Tesla and Edison and Woodrow Wilson. But they were looking at a kind of technological past that was bringing them back in touch with it. The inventor of FM radio came to Cayce. So we have a number of people who were from these periods of time in Atlantis with the high technology, including Cayce's own son, Edgar Evans Cayce, who I had the pleasure to meet, and who really was a remarkable person in that in his 90s, he looked like a guy easily in his 60s, I would say. So he took the readings to heart. But he was a mechanical engineer and had been instructed in a Cayce reading, which they had kept hidden for a long time. I think they let most of it out now, but he was basically one of the people who pulled the pin back there in Atlantean times, and he was known as the dreaded one in Atlantean periods. If you think about that, that's quite remarkable. This is like somebody who pressed the nuclear button. So this was quite a karma for him to live down. He came back incredibly brilliant, and those readings instructed Edgar Evans not to use that scientific knowledge for the military. And in fact, the military came calling, even in his late 20s, to use his scientific expertise, and he turned him down flat and just stuck to kind of civic engineering. A remarkable story, and he wrote one of my favorite books, which is a collection of Cayce readings called Edgar Cayce on Atlantis. This book was released in 1968 and is the greatest sort of foundation for giving us a snapshot of what that was all about. And it caused a bit of a craze there among 60s people who were really kind of opening up to this esoteric, mystical side of things. There was a lot of information coming out about psychic phenomena, reincarnation, and the rest. And I think that this forms a good backdrop because there was something rising there which got snuffed out by the time we got into the later 90s. But there's something quite fascinating, too, when you look at it. There were certain celebrities who were really into Edgar Cayce. John Lennon became absolutely fascinated with Cayce's predictions of Atlantis rising. And this brings us into an area and something about the title of the show, which is Amilius in the HotZone, the RATA Atlantis secret. The HotZone, then, being something we identified on this program, which I originally got some information which had not been in the public domain before, which is that there's an area that stretches between the Yucatan and the coast of Florida and the in Bimini and the western tip of Cuba. And that area, for certain private contractors and for groups like the military, or for groups who are doing mapping of the ocean floors, etc., they refer to it internally as the hot zone. Now, the hot zone is an area that when they see things that are large structures that are archaeological in nature, if they see an Atlantean temple or an Egyptian temple down there, they have to sign NDAs saying, we're not going to reveal any of that. In the case of the military, you can actually get court-martialed for this. When I went around with this information to various people who are pretty well known for their research along the lines of ancient civilizations and asked them, have you heard of this hot zone before? They had heard of it in one variety or another, but it was not unfamiliar to them. There was definitely a knowledge that something was referred to as the hot zone in this area. And the more research I did on it, of course, there's a whole series here on the channel about Hemingway and all of the things that he was doing in the hot zone and how so much of his being in Bimini in Cuba was all about these searches. And they had it under the guise with Hemingway, which was absolutely ridiculous, that he was looking for Nazi U-boats. Now, the ship that he was out there was equipped with scientific cameras, no guns, nothing. So if you came across a U-boat, you'd be sunk in the water. And so that's a real joke when they say that. He went on those missions endlessly and was always scanning the bottom of that floor. And I believe that a number of things that we found about Ernest and the fact that JFK had to smuggle so many of the things that were in his vault is very indicative of the type of deep research that he was doing. In fact, JFK, as we found out, risked an international incident in order to get his stuff out at the behest of Mary Hemingway, his widow, who showed up at the White House and said, we got to do something about this. And there's a picture of them meeting, in fact. Of course, all of Ernest's effects and his legacy would be vouchsafed there at the JFK Library through Jackie Kennedy and still there. And, there's a number of letters and things that you can go there and read, but you can't make photocopies or anything like that. It's, there's only a certain amount of things that you can do with it. The hot zone, there's also a number of intelligence people who have come out, British intelligence mostly, who were interested in Atlantis and came out and said, well, in fact, there's a number of countries that are looking for this. Edgar Cayce Sykes was major on this, largely ignored figure in Atlantis circle, probably the most well-read, and his entire legacy was bought up at the end of his life by the ARE, but they just really didn't do anything with it. Luckily, I was able to obtain his entire legacy of his Atlantis journals digitally, and they are quite remarkable. I think I actually have one here. This is how they used to come out. They were just these little journals of research from like 1975, and they go from 1955 to 1980, and they're full of some of the most remarkable information, and I try to share as much of Edgar Cayce's work as possible. One of the key things he said is, look, Russia's involved in the hot zone. China's involved in the hot zone. Venezuela's involved in the hot zone. America's involved in the hot zone. They're all there, and there's a number of things that they're studying, including magnetic currents, but the big key were these ancient ruins. And we find so many fascinating people. We did an episode here, which was X-100, which was Ghislaine in the hot zone. And this is Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein and their oceanography project to save the world, supposedly. Not at all. They were studying these ruins as well, and they were bringing big wig scientists like Stephen Hawking's and all the rest of it down there to look at these things. And this is because there's a number of ruins that are becoming visible now. Cayce had originally said that the ruins, as they rise, would be most visible at Bimini. And he predicted in 1968, he made the prediction, I think, in 1940, that we'd start to see the beginning of it. And in fact, they found the Bimini Road during this period fulfilling something that he had just made a snapshot of in his mind there 28 years earlier. But he said that that area was called Poseidia, and that it was the most dominant island, and it's where this Amilius group was. Now, that whole area sank. The only thing left above water now is that western tip of Cuba and Bimini, some of the Bahamas, and the peninsula around the Yucatan. So that's where we are with it. One of the things that Edgar Cayce Psychic, the intelligence agent I just referenced, put on the record back in the 1970s was that there's a large Isis temple sunken in the Bahamas, which 3 countries know about, have photos of, and all the rest of it. So there's a big competition going on about these underwater ruins. And then you have to ask yourself, why? Why are they so desperately trying to be the first ones who get their hands on this material? It's very much like the UFO disclosure piece as well. And I would actually submit that because we're dealing here with the human origin story, and because we're dealing with advanced technology in an advanced ancient civilization, it's actually more important disclosure. And the alien thing, there's so much misinformation around it in any case. Although certainly there are off-world civilizations visiting here. That's very obvious, but largely misinterpreted and largely, they've put out a kind of a threat meme, as we've done many shows on this, through the Central Intelligence Agency. And we have real big problems with the CIA when it comes to the esoteric subjects, and also when it comes to things like UFOs, because they have their own agenda about how to portray these things and how to, just like they're making the injection, it's like worship the injection. They have their own ideas about how to do an alien invasion op, for example. So when we go back to this death ray idea, now Cayce's giving this reading, and they actually ask him, when did this meeting take place? Because he talks about these groups in Atlantis scientific meeting, to figure out how to use this death ray to eliminate these large beasts. Now, which were overrunning everything. It sounds very much, as I've pointed out, like the dinosaurs. And there's a real big problem here, because in traditional history, we're told that the dinosaurs were eliminated in 65 million years ago by a comet blast or something of that nature. Doesn't add up with history at all. There's a pretty big gap between the 50,000 BC date that Cayce gives for getting rid of the dinosaurs with this death ray and 65 million years. You have to wonder about this. I've told on this program many times, I've told the story of Carnegie and his absolute obsession with dinosaur ruins. We've seen the whole Jurassic Park thing about reanimating these things. There's a lot of strange secrets around the entire dinosaur piece.
Can I throw you a question?
Yes.
On those notes? Okay, so
Absolutely.
AM says, I find it interesting how in the Cayce readings, the Belial group were trying to get rid of the dinosaurs, but really was to exert power. Is zero COVID the new dinosaurs?
Wow, isn't that great? Well, here's the thing. You make a really good point, which is what Cayce says about them implementing this death ray to do this is that in the implementation, it's the equivalent of like early nuclear accidents. Like they have these accidents and they set off these volcanic eruptions. But I want to show how this idea of the death ray sort of was kept. It was vouchsafed by these mystery schools for a long time, and they kept it out of the hands of these countries, again, being able to use it because they had misused it so badly in Atlantis. So all this technology went underground, and it was very advanced technology. Let's read the actual quote from the reading on this. And again, this is Cayce giving this reading, and it's in the 262 series. If you track those things, that's a good series. Question. Please advise me regarding the preparation and presentation of the article I'm preparing for the great Congress held during the age of the destruction of the enormous animals that once roamed the earth. And Cayce says, as to the manner to which these gathered, it was very much as would be were the Graf Zeppelin to start the various portions for those that represented, or were to gather those that were to counsel, were to cooperate in that effort. And as this then was in that particular plane or sphere that then was in the land which has long since lost its identity, except in the inner thought or visions of those that have returned or are returning to the present sphere. Of course, he's referring to Atlantis here. The ways and means devised were as those that would alter or change the environment for which those beasts were needed, or that necessary for that sustenance in the particular portions of the sphere on Earth that they occupied. I read that as destroying their habitat, in fact. This was administered much in the same way or manner as were there sent out from various central plants that which is termed in the present the death ray, or the supercosmic ray. By the way, Tesla had submitted his plan for a death ray in 1927 as a way to combat the rising fascism. And this death ray that he's referring to is obviously in the zeitgeist at the time. That which many are seeking into, which will give their lives much from the stratosphere or cosmic rays that will be found in the next 25 years. Okay, the reading's 1933. It's 25 years because it was 1958. And again, so many things happen in 58. And Cayce will repeatedly refer to this period, 58 to 98, as a testing period that we will go through to set up this kind of huge clash that we're seeing right now, where the materialism and the rising science is going right up there with the rise of human consciousness. And there's the clash of the scientific materialism with the rising spiritual consciousness, which is right where we are now. And they're trying to strangle that with this, try to worship the science, which is not real science at all. Of course, that's paid science. So then he's asked, what was the date BC of this gathering? And he says 50,722 BC. So it's a real snapshot that in this period, 50,000 BC, we're advanced enough on the Atlantean side to send out death rays to kill these dinosaurs. So if we go back, I'm always fascinated about how the technology is lost and how it echoes itself through the legends and all the rest. One of the most fascinating, I think, around the death ray is Archimedes. And this is the story of the siege of this Greek city of Syracuse by the Romans, lasting from the spring of 213 BC. And this is all from the Britannica Encyclopedia, through the autumn of 212 BC. The brilliant Syracuse inventor and mathematician Archimedes, he lived from 287 to 212 BC. He developed a spectacular invention to keep the Roman ships at bay. He built a death ray using mirrors to concentrate the light of the sun on the Roman ships, thereby setting them on fire. Archimedes of Syracuse was, they go into kind of a history there, but the basic depiction of this thing and why I'm so interested in it, I think it's that leftover of the Atlantean technology, because he's using it to zap these ships, and it's clearly a laser ray. I think it's pretty obvious from this story that the echo of the Atlantean technology is still there. It's still active. There's still a way to access it. I saw some depictions of these dinosaurs dying from these rays also. This would be the Atlantean death ray weapon. I mean, you could probably look at that and say it's a comet, but I'm trying to give us the idea of how they would have exercised these things. So we have this 50,000 close to 50,000 years later, there's an echo of this technology. Somebody, some group, some mystery center, some mystery school has maintained that technology over time, and they're using it here for the invading Romans. There's another shot of that, and Archimedes using that incredible death ray to set those ships on fire. And they also talk about it, they call it science fire in the record. And we have to figure that out because they don't use the regular word for fire. They're basically saying it's a strange fire, like it's a chemical fire, in fact. There are other references to this tech. In fact, if you go into the record, and you'll see back there some of those battles, some of these guys are shooting fire in a way that's not just little fire throwers. They've got some extra handy technology that the other groups aren't finding out about. So how these things are kept underground becomes kind of a foundation of steganography, which is what we cover here. The name of the show, after all, is the X-Steganography series. So what is it that happens is basically we get up to a certain point of technology, and then after that, destruction happens, as we're seeing it so much in the present. Then the groups that have that technology hide it, so that the next group that comes up won't have the access to that, and then burn everything down again. This has to be understood. If you go and actually read The Secret Doctrine, you're going to find something very strange, and that's by H.B. Blavatsky, and was quite remarkable. It had two sections, one on science, one on theology, but it's a great breakthrough in esoteric literature, and it came out in 1888. But what Blavatsky does is she dedicates a whole chapter to John Keely, and she talks all about Keely and his technology. And you have to ask yourself, of course, Keely is like Tesla in that period. He's experimenting with these things I call X technology. But what's happening, in fact, is she and Rudolf Steiner start suggesting that the work that Keely is doing won't be brought to fruition because humanity is not ready for it. And in fact, what will happen with World War I is we'll take the technology that we have, flight and all the rest of it, and we all saw how that ended. So what happens is when Keely is in fact killed. I mean, they say that he died of natural causes, but everything that I can see there in the middle of his research, he is in fact killed. And then there's a great rush to grab his technology at a warehouse in Boston. His partner ships it over to the UK before any of these kind of greedy corporations that are hanging around can get their hands on it. And then they try to put him on trial as a fraud because, they're trying to blackmail him to get this technology back. What's discovered, if you go deep into the record, is that all of Keely's technology went across the sea and landed at the Theosophical Society, which was headed up by Annie Besant. Besant was passed the torch by Blavatsky directly to her, and she led the Theosophical Society, and she is the one who started the German chapter that had Rudolf Steiner at its helm. And she basically, Steiner worked with her for 2 years, and so you could say that she oversaw his development. And she had a partner in theosophy named C.W. Ledbetter that Steiner didn't agree with because he thought because
he was a pervert.
I think it went deeper than that, but
okay.
Yes, he definitely. I'm sure that's a big.
Steiner had very high standards.
I think what I was going to say there is, though, fundamentally there's an impatience that grows out of theosophy. It's almost like a panic. And then we have to bring on the world teacher. Now, Blavatsky predicted the world teacher, which is a big tenet in theosophy, but for the 21st century. So they were trying to jump the gun by 100 years by having Krishnamurti sort of host this world teacher. So there was quite a push there on the mystery side. And this was such, it involved so many important people. Gandhi was involved. Of course, Edison was a member of the Theosophical Society. That cream of the crop of the scientific community were all very interested in theosophy. I like that. Pervert. One of the key things I want to say also about the death ray idea is by the time we get back to Tesla proposing the death ray in 1927 and really trying to help, in the 30s, America by saying, look, you can utilize this thing and the Nazis won't mess with you. Is that technology, again, we're talking about steganography and the advanced technology. I call it X technology. So when we talk about that advanced X technology, it could be really obvious. I mean, it could be really misinterpreted that whenever I refer to that, it's about UFO technology, because the X technology resides in that UFO file for secrecy purposes. But the X technology existed long before there was a UFO file, and this is the other piece of it. I'm also going to introduce a couple of themes tonight, which is Cayce talking about aliens, which is not very well reported on. In fact, a lot of the Cayce information and the dissemination of that information focuses kind of heavily on the medical side and the idealism, which is good, but there's a huge background of esoteric information in the Cayce work, and it's been Cayce's name has been exploited. You always have these jokers coming out saying, I'm Edgar Cayce reincarnated. We've seen them all, but the work has been exploited in many ways, and in fact, I found out that only about a quarter of the readings have been put out in books. Of course, the organization has a high ethical standard and makes all the readings available. But in terms of what has actually made it into circulation from books that have been published, it's actually less than a quarter of the readings that he gave. Cayce talked about Atlantis being a place where they had such technology as, they had planes that could fly through mountains. They had planes that could fly underwater and above ground, and they had something which seems like they could point anywhere in the universe and be there. So they did this all through something called the Two-Eye Stone, which is the power stations that they developed, and eventually this Belial group that the Amilius group was in competition with for leadership of Atlantis got the upper hand and started using this advanced two-eye technology, which sounds very much like a laser, or very advanced laser technology. In fact, there was a NASA scientist who was very interested in this, and in the 1970s, he put out a series of diagrams based on the Cayce readings of what this two-eye stone looked like and what it could do. And the spelling on it is Tuaoi, which is also very important. I want to point this out, that Cayce put a number of things on the record which went kind of unexplored. Two-eye stone, the term just kind of hung out there until I researched it with Gigi Young. And two-eye has all kinds of, the Tuatha De Danann, for example, these other groups, they all have that TUA in there. And two-eye also meant the stone of people, the people's stone. Eventually, Cayce said it would be called the mighty terrible crystal because of its misuse, and people's memory of it is just causing all these volcanic eruptions. And so another piece here I want to bring in is this whole thing about Apotheum, which we bring in on this show. And I'm going to spell that one out too. It's Apotheum. And this is, it's basically, you could say it's a made up word because I put it together based on seeing it in different documents at different times. It's not a word you can look up in the dictionary, but I've actually found references to it in older, much older documents from the Middle Ages. But I think, and there are variations on spellings. Apotheum is a math theorem. Apophium, A-P-O-P-H, has a pharmaceutical reference. Apotheum, and the way I've put it across, is this kind of physics negating reality. And this is why I bring in the UFO file in this. We know in so many of the UFO stories, what happens is all physics of physical reality, the universal laws start failing. People start walking through walls and things of this nature. This sounds very much like the ability of the Atlanteans to go through things. So it's a matter dissolving kind of environment. The thing about the UFO file and why it causes blackouts and plants won't grow and time disappears, there's the whole time factor with abductees, is because there's a utilization there of this Apotheum. And this is why the secrecy is so heavy around it, much more so than just the revelation that there are other beings out there in the universe. As a matter of fact, the CIA seems so anxious to reveal that now so they can reveal their kind of fake AI alien. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 110 on 10/10/21. And we're going deep here on Amilius in the HotZone, the RATA Atlantean Egypt secret. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. Miss Olivia, what's going on out there?
Wendy Eder wants to know, are the mystery schools in a race to acquire lost X technology in a race ahead of an anticipated Earth-changing event?
There's no question that both the government, the mystery schools, you have to understand, the secret societies are also certain types of mystery schools, and so they're operating on a very different ethical basis. But they share the same knowledge as the kind of good groups do. So you have a problem there where they can predict these things that are incoming, whether it's astronomical problems or pole shifts or whatever. So the loose answer to your question is yes. The mystery schools in general, in my opinion, over the past 150 years, if you really track the history and don't take it as fragmentary things like, hey, this group popped up here, but you really look and you thread that needle from the periods when there was this huge craze and the Fox sisters came out doing this mediumistic thing, and Abraham Lincoln got into using Emma Britton as a spokesperson. And Emma Britton was the person who founded, along with Helena Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society. So there's deep knowledge on the esoteric side around the brotherhoods and the mystery schools on the political side. When Rudolf Steiner talks about it, who, of course, Steiner's the mystic and scholar who started anthroposophy, which is the spiritual science, he says, look, it's hand in glove, the mystery schools with the political system in America. This is the period that he's talking about. That's the early 20th century. If anything, I would imagine that degree of integration has continued at a very fast clip. So you have mystery schools on both sides, right-hand side and left-hand side, very deep in the political process of this period in time. So no question that there's an acceleration that we've been involved in. And I would say that acceleration took place immediately after this 58 to 98 period that Cayce had identified. Let's find out something old about the mystery schools. And I want to say this about Steiner's work. I think he put the most on the record about the schools and how they operate. I think that this was very bold, and I think it subjected him to a lot of obstacles, including the destruction of the Goetheanum, the first one, by the Nazis, which really took a major toll because he spent something like a decade putting it together. And also his own subsequent death by poison, which is not very heavily reported in his bio because he wanted it that way, in fact. But Steiner was poisoned, and the poison killed him over the course of about a week. And he made it known that he didn't want this to be, his epitaph, which is spiritual leader comes in, does all this stuff, and then everyone just knows, oh, this guy got poisoned, So he wanted the work to stand on its own. But there's great obstacles, and I find that the establishment, in fact, still likes to go after the Waldorf schools. For example, in relation to this injection thing, they're going after them very heavily because they're known to think very independently. So watch that one play out, because these things are playing out on a very large scale. It's so funny because I mentioned this to you earlier, which is that when you look at the things that we've brought forward on, during the episodes of the X series. Now, the X series has run about 3.5 years. I mean, I've been doing Dark Journalist for about a decade, but during that point of the X series, if you go back and look just at like 2018 episodes, you're going to find all of the stuff that we're putting out there, the Nixon Trump stuff and all these other things. And this is not to say, well, we're so great because we're so ahead of the curve. It's just that the information is there. All we have to do is work together to network that awareness, just like we do in the ideas room and that great back and forth that we have, and with the questions that Olivia does and all the rest. It's one big conversation that goes back. And that's how we can say to ourselves, oh, you know what? That thing that came out about, these Nixon letters to Trump setting him up to become president in 2016, and, how the New York Post reports it now openly in the public, and it's just very well known. Well, since we had that discussion in 2018, we get a handle on these things before the larger public has the ability to access it. This is kind of a crucial thing in an environment like this, where the timing becomes very important around these revelations. Okay, Steiner brought forward anthroposophy. As I said, Besant really brought him forward, I have to say. I don't know if she always gets the credit on that, but she saw, he already was a genius and had some books out. But he was largely marginalized, in that period. And it is Besant who sees his genius and thinks, aha, he can run the German branches of theosophy. And she gives him that role, and he's sensational in it. So he also had a great respect for her kind of what he referred to as her noble purpose. So even though he felt she got manipulated later, they had a very good working relationship for 2 or 3 years. That, I think, is crucial because we have to understand that theosophy and anthroposophy are the same. They have the same root, even though what happens to theosophy is they bend it around to the Eastern concepts and the Eastern schools, pushing it too far in that direction. And it is, in fact, the Western mystery tradition that was already set up by the East. The Eastern tradition since 3000 BC had been giving us that setup for the Western mystery tradition to become in full bloom in this period. So theosophy, by originally getting that with Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine, and then bending the entire thing towards the Eastern school and forgetting the Western mystery tradition, was basically like, it's kind of like, we had a great team last year, and now let's have a great team this year. And it's, they want the same team to win the World Series over and over again. But at a certain point, you have to pass it to the other team. Now, the sports metaphors abound tonight. A little bit on Steiner and who he refers to as Manu. This is Amilius, and Manu is actually a title. So it's this great initiate he's referring to is, in fact, Amilius. And then we're going to go into Cayce's version of Amilius. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X series episode 110, going deep on Amilius in the HotZone. Okay, quote. When a seer whose spiritual eye is opened so that he knows how to read the fine script of the Akasha Chronicle, looks back into the spiritual worlds, he discovers the sites from which the culture and all spiritual life of those times emanated. Our souls can discover the sites where the masters and their disciples assembled in the mystery schools of that time. There were many such mystery centers on the ancient Atlantean continent, and they differed from those of today and were given a different name. They were not just churches and not just schools, but rather a combination of both. This is crucial. Gurdjieff brings this forward as well. They give demonstrations. So in church, there's worship, and there's listening to the priest or the preacher, and there's Bible study and things of this nature in Sunday school. But these are demonstration schools. In fact, Gurdjieff refers to them as schools of demonstration and exhibition. They show techniques, they show the things while they're doing this. This is a crucial thing for us to keep in mind, not just to think of them as, somebody's going to church or somebody's going to school to study. They bring them together so that the spiritual element then encompasses the learning and brings them both together, something which is really lacking, I think, in this period of time. Okay. Those who searched for truth could find both religion and wisdom in the mystery schools. Here, religion and wisdom were one. Using a modern word, we can characterize the concept of these cultic centers, the mystery schools, by the term Atlantean Oracles. This is the first mystery schools. This is the name given to them by the European mystery schools, but originally they were called something entirely different. He doesn't say what they were called. I wish that he had. In the Atlantean Oracles and their centers of wisdom, spiritual life was differentiated in the same way that external knowledge in the areas of trade and professions are subdivided. There were various branches of spiritual investigation, occult wisdom, and ancient Atlantis, but everything in those times depended on different conditions. Wisdom varied from one oracle to another according to the capacities of the human beings and their external environment. A connection existed between certain human capacities and certain planets. That is, certain mystical occult capacities were connected with special planets. Therefore, on the Atlantean continent, we should distinguish between oracles of the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So these mystery schools were set up directly on astrology. So, they went through the 12 houses, and they had the 7 planetary bodies that they used in that period. So they would have someone who was an oracle of Venus, someone who's an oracle of Mercury, and so on. This is very important because the characteristics and the information that they're getting would have to do directly with the realm, which gets pretty cosmological. Our present capacities developed out of the cosmos, as did the Earth, and they are in each case tied to different planets and their influences. On Atlantis, people who were suited to develop this or that cognitive capacity were chosen from the population and assigned to one of the 7 oracles. So they had the advanced initiates look out, and they would grab somebody, they would look out and see like a Gigi Young and say, she needs to be the Venus Oracle. So they would plug these people into the different schools. People were chosen who were suited to develop this or that cognitive capacity and were chosen from that population and assigned to one of the 7 oracles. Of the 7 oracles which were named after the 7 planets in ancient Atlantis, the Sun Oracle stood out from all the others, but next to it, the Vulcan Oracle prepared itself in secrecy for its future task. Okay, so Vulcan, again, comes up in all of these Steiner presentations. And Vulcan, like the 8th sphere, is a sphere that's in development. It's not a planet that we can see and point to directly. It's something that is coming about. And so much of the kind of cosmic shootout that's going on right now between the harmonic forces, which is the dark astral side that Steiner identifies, has to do with what's supposed to happen with humanity spiritually. Is it's supposed to spiritually evolve through this warmth of Vulcan emanating with the solar powers. And then that creates something called New Jupiter. This is the kind of cosmological reference that Steiner is giving us. That is New Jerusalem. That's what the religious traditions are based on. And so that becomes the new Earth, So New Jupiter is the next stage. And what the harmonic forces are doing are trying to lock us into a false evolutionary step called the 8th sphere. And the 8th sphere, again, something like virtual reality. So that's just kind of a fundamental thing.
Wait, can I rewind? Okay, so I'm a little distracted by the chat, so I just wanted to ask you. So Vulcan is could you just clarify that? It's something that is being constructed with our consciousness, with our transmuted karma. How does that work? Is that something good, right? We want to create this. And how does it relate to New Jupiter?
This is the interesting thing. It's that there are spheres in development. So just as in Steiner's cosmology, there's spheres of things that have happened before, like the old moon. These are steps of evolution that have taken place. Vulcan is a future step in evolution that's in preparation. And so the thing that's being set up there to block it is the eighth sphere development. These are both, we can't think of them as hard, solid substance places. There is something that kicks around in the 19th century and before about the idea that there's going to be a planet called Vulcan. And eventually Pluto is discovered and a lot of that goes away, but somebody else had theorized that there was an actual other planet out there, very often referred to as Planet X. And so we know that there's something else that's going out there that's a solid body. In reference to Vulcan and the eighth sphere, these are realms, and they're spherical realms that are in development, which will become physicalized. But at this point, they're almost in like an etheric stage. And so when Vulcan comes up, that's one of them that he's doing. But he references here, you have to look for clues in Steiner's work where he says, it's being developed in secret. Why, you have all those realms already and all the secretiveness. Why is Vulcan already secret? The Sun Oracle stood out from all the others, but next to it, the Vulcan Oracle prepared itself in secrecy for its future task. So there's a lot of interesting secrets here. When you do things in secret, it's so you don't get interfered with. And this is going to become important when we consider the cosmology of it. But yeah, that's a good point about it. How does it play into it? I'm going to read a little more of this.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yes.
Luke Walker wants to know. He said, Steiner said archangels are in a Vulcan state, and humans will be in that state in the future too.
Yes.
So
that's true. This is what is being. This is what they're shooting for, which is that humanity rises up to that point and holds that ethereal warmth. That is this kind of gift of the solar beings, and they connect that with this kind of mystery or the esoteric Christian. So actually, as I get into this a little bit further, we're going to understand it because there's a big crisscross with Amilius with this. Okay, so all of you have heard of the time when the sun separated from the earth. This is again Steiner addressing his pupils. This is crucial, which is the moon and the sun, according to Steiner, both came out of the earth and have to do with humanity's development. When the sun left and then the solar beings left with it, that's when Ahriman, who was also an evolutionary piece, became part of the evolution of the earth and kind of dominated humanity there. This is the problem, really a kind of fundamental problem in all this, which is there was a period where the moon was present in the earth, not outside of it as a satellite, but in the earth, and the sun was gone and the solar beings had emanated from it. This is all in the Steiner cosmology. So what happens is we develop a kind of unusual attachment with Ahriman, and Ahriman starts to seep into our evolutionary process. That's when that gets in there. So when we go into this, we're finding ourselves, we have to understand, there's a lot of theories about the moon and about the sun. So when we work directly off anthroposophy, we're just going to work with as he has presented it, whether or not we think the moon came out of the earth. After the moon too had left, the earth was able to realize its destination of becoming the abode of humanity. If the sun alone had influenced the earth, the latter would have gone into such a rapid development that human beings would have become old soon after birth. By contrast, if our Earth had only been under the influence of the moon, human beings would have stiffened and become mummies. Think of that. We're seeing a lot of that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Development would have been too slow, and their bodies would have reached a state of rigidity. However, through a wise guiding force, sun and moon maintained a balance in the external influence they exert on the Earth, and this enabled the Earth and human beings to develop at a speed suitable to them. The beings of Mars, Mercury, Venus, and so on, who did not need the forces that had left with the moon and Earth for their development, departed with the sun to take up their own abode. So a little more on this. During the ancient Atlantean epoch, the adepts of the Sun Oracle had been initiated into the deeds of this lofty sun being, the Great Initiate. This is when we're going to get into Manu here, who is Amilius. The Great Initiate was the leader of this highest oracle, had been initiated in the most comprehensive ways into these mysteries. The entire ancient Atlantean, and as we shall see, into the post-Atlantean culture, proceeded from him, the Manu. So it's like saying the Christ. This is the position, as it were. As this leader of the Sun Oracle was called, the Manu, although the name doesn't really matter all that much, did not choose the main representatives of the post-Atlantean culture from scholars and scientists. The people who were endowed with spiritual and psychic knowledge, who were in those days were approximately comparable to the scientists and scholars of our time, they weren't chosen. Rather, plain people who had begun gradually to lose their kind of scientific and scholarly abilities. Basically, the kind of average people who were not part of a scientific elite there in Atlantis. These are the people he wanted to work with. And he was looking for people who had the full consciousness of self, the ability to address the I in oneself. The great Manu, this is back to the presentation again, the great Manu gathered about him those who were able to function intellectually. And not the magi, but those who absorbed and developed the rudiments of arithmetic. Very unusual. They were the despised who knew nothing on the opinion of the leading people. And in this, they were not unlike the Theosophists today, yet it was they with whom the great Manu journeyed to the sanctuary in Asia from which post-Atlantean culture was to emanate. So this is really interesting. What happens is Manu, who is Amilius, he decides what we're going to do is we're going to take the people who are not sort of the elite magicians of Atlantis. I want to work with people who are kind of the outcasts. And there's something about those groups that for some reason, the ones that he's selecting, according to Steiner, are good at arithmetic. And this is important for developing the sense of individual I. There's something strange there. He's dropping a hint. Why arithmetic? Think about it. Numbers, mathematics. Something strange about Manu just saying, I want the mathematicians out of this group. So he says, now the great initiate took something very valuable with him when he journeyed from ancient Atlantis to Europe. To accomplish this, he had, let me put it this way, traveled to and expected the other oracles. You all know that in the case of ordinary people, the etheric body separates from the astral body and the ego soon after death and gradually dissolves in the universal ether. The same happens with the astral body after a certain time. But this law is sometimes broken in the interest of spiritual economy. This is what happened in the case of the etheric bodies of the 7 greatest initiates who were the leaders of the ancient Atlantean oracles. They continued to have their astral bodies. What does it mean when we say work on ourselves? It means that we purify the etheric body and the astral body. Now, once purified, the spiritualized etheric and astral bodies do not dissolve after death, but are preserved in accordance with the law of spiritual economy. They can be used as a resource. They can be drawn upon. So when we talk about ascended masters and people are like, how can Saint Germain be 800 years old? It's because he has actualized himself to such an ability to create this astral shell, which is very comparable to the physical shell, and appear anywhere he wants and take part in any conversation or any event or whatever it happens to be, and seem totally human. So Saint Germain is, we see him in 1600, we see him in 1700, we see him in the 19th century. Actually, some of the Theosophists claim that they see Saint Germain. So how, is he an immortal? The idea is that these people, once they overcome their physical life, are able to project themselves. And if they want to stay here and continue to interact, they have the ability to do that. This is a very crucial thing that Steiner gets across. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X series. We're here in episode 110 to go deep into Amilius and the RATA secret. And we need that Steiner foundation in order to do it. That's what we just got. Keep that in mind as we move forward here to understand the kind of mystery revelations coming directly out of the legacy of these mystery schools. We're going to be taking your question in the second half of the program, and Miss Olivia is already putting those together so you can ask them. I'm looking forward to interacting with the ideas from tonight. There's so many things flying around. What do you got?
They're all really great questions. So just back up with Vulcan for a minute. Najat Madri says, it's the next phase of human development. Earth will eventually die off in approximately 6,000 years. New Jerusalem will be on Vulcan.
Yeah. This is very interesting. And of course, it goes along with what Steiner has been putting out there. We've heard a lot about, even in traditional religion, you have purgatory, you have hell, you have heaven, and all the rest of it. And the eighth sphere has a sound, like purgatory has a little bit of a resonance with the eighth sphere, in my opinion. But the heavily, the technology agent of the astral side with Ahriman, that brings us, we're in a technological age, so it sort of brings us to a different level of looking at this stuff than, say, they had access to, even though they could look down the road in theosophical times. When they're coming forward in 1875, they're looking down the road and they're saying, oh boy, the scientific materialism is covering up humanity's understanding of the spiritual nature, and it's cutting them off. The industrialization is cutting them off. That's back then. Okay. If you look at what we have now, you have people who are almost completely devoid of any consideration around anything spiritual or any true contact. Like, it's difficult for them to get in contact with their conscience because it's covered over by other things. It's latent. It's latent in everybody, in fact. And everyone has the ability to do it, but you have to be reminded, and this is why I think there's such a war. This is difficult because there's a war on religious groups. There's a war on Christianity in America. And however we feel about how Christianity has been used as like a big business thing, or, the moral majority, or there's great judgments associated with it. Nonetheless, in fact, it maintains the fundamental identification with Christ. And this is a big problem for the darker groups that are coming in to kind of control humanity and herd them like sheep into this eighth sphere reality. Because even the recognition around, we have a lot of schools and places where you can't pronounce, you can't say prayers. A lot of them, you can't even say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? So they need to kind of outdo the identity of these Christians, because those Christians will never submit themselves to kind of a mark of the beast style system. Now, when I was growing up, when you'd hear things like Jerry Falwell and stuff, you thought it was ridiculous. And it's, even as a kid, I thought that stuff was idiotic. And, even if you believed in something that the people would say, you wouldn't believe in who they were. And we had televangelists and all that kind of stuff. Everyone remembers this. But nonetheless, and something like the Mark of the Beast would be like a joke, like some Christian Bible thumper thinks that the Mark of the Beast is coming. But fundamentally, if you study it from a mystery school perspective, when John of Patmos has that vision in Revelation and sees it, he sees that people won't be able to transact without accepting the mark. This is, I think, very deep mystery realization that has to be looked at entirely outside of the kind of Bible thumper way of doing it. What it is, it's a great realization. So the information is there. Have people taken that too far? We've seen it, Christian culture being used to kind of justify all kinds of things, and the takeover of America and South America and Cortez and all that. It was all, oh, hey, those godless groups, we have to go in there with our great God thing and take their gold. So we've seen it abused. However, even in spite of all that, the importance of that Christian recognition in Christians in America against this thing, the scientific materialism, which is worship us at the altar of this injection and all the rest of it. There is the clash there because just the mere recognition of the Christian following and mentality sets up a clash with this very, very pernicious control grid that's trying to come in and sort of reduce humanity through the scientific materialism to projecting their consciousness in a box, which is actually not possible because humanity and its consciousness emanates from a chakra system, which is embedded in their endocrine system. And those people study the mystery science around that. They know it very well. So this whole thing about, hey, I'm going to be able to project my consciousness, won't this be great? That's just an invitation to get sucked into this eighth sphere thing. So that gives us, I think, a little bit of a background on that. Okay, so Steiner has given us this information that this initiate, Manu, saw that the destruction of Atlantis was coming and took with him this group. I want to get into some of the Amilius readings from Edgar Cayce and sort of cross-reference the two characters, because Amilius, in fact, is identified as Adam in the Cayce readings. But there's kind of a mystical twist to it because he says, as Amilius, as Adam. So again, what we have to remember is Adam is a station. It's a station of humanity coming in to the earth. So Adam is not just, hey, there's Adam, the person. Adam is 5 senses, the 5 races, all at once happening in the Cayce cosmology we're looking at now. Okay, let's get a couple of basics down on Cayce's version. Before we go there, I want to put in a zinger from Cosmic Memory, which is actually called Atlantis and Lemuria and is cited in the Cayce readings. But I think this is important, and I always recommend Cosmic Memory. It's kind of the most accessible and deepest book in the style. That and Knowledge of Higher Worlds. Okay. Now he's talking about reading the Akasha Chronicle, which is something that Blavatsky and these others could do. And supposedly now, looking back, Plato and other people could do it. They could put themselves into that state, and the Akasha Chronicle is just something that records everything that has ever happened to it, and you tune into it and you watch things like a movie, basically. When one follows the Akasha Chronicle, it does indeed appear that in the first Lemurian period, later physical man, because of his double sex, was a totally different being from that which one today would designate as a man. This is crucial. So in this period, the Lemurian period, which is 200,000 BC, somewhere in there, everyone is in one sex. So there's no male and female. That's a kind of a hermaphrodite. So what he says is he could not connect any sensory perceptions with thoughts. He did not think. His life was one of impulses. His soul expressed itself only in instinct, appetites, in animal desires, and so on. His consciousness was dreamlike. He lived in dullness. So what we have is when Cayce talks about Amilius, the first thing that Amilius does is he splits the sexes. So that's where the Adam and Eve story comes from. Now we're going into the mystery work of the Cayce readings. Let's take a look at a couple of these. Here's somebody asking, how large was Atlantis during the time of Amilius? Cayce answers, the comparison would be Europe, including Asia in Europe. Not Asia, but Asia in Europe. See, this composed as seen in or after the first of the destruction, what will be termed now with the present position, the southernmost portion of same. The islands were created by those of the first volcanic eruptive forces that were brought into play in the destruction of same. So he's saying this, the continent actually stretched from the Gulf of Mexico on one side to the Mediterranean on the other. So it encompasses the entire Atlantic, and that the original breakup starts to happen in the southernmost portions. And it's because of the activities of this Belial group warring with this Amilius group. The Amilius group then being this Adamic line. This is the Adam spiritualized man version, and the Belial group being a different group, a group that wants to use the same exact technology, as it were, the two-eye stone, etc., for domination. So we're looking at the separation of the Amilius and the Belial group. The Belial group will go on, and they will eventually win out and cause the destruction of Atlantis. And it is the destructions when they use the technology in this way that splits Atlantis into 3 islands. Poseidia, which is the island that Amilius, that's his domain, and Arian and Og. And Poseidia is that area all around Bimini and Florida and Cuba, that area we called the hot zone earlier. So what happens is there's a wonderful and somewhat overlooked book called Lives of the Master, where Edgar Cayce tracks the different lifetimes of Christ. And one of those lifetimes, they ask Cayce in a reading, when did Christ become aware that he was going to save humanity? And he says, when he fell in Eden. So he sets up this whole chain of people questioning him about what he meant by that. And then he goes into the different lives of Christ. So this is the esoteric version of Christ in the mystery tradition. If somebody doesn't believe in reincarnation, then this section won't make a whole lot of sense to them. However, if we understand the progression, the kind of mystery progression of the life of these initiates, they would go through many different lifetimes building up to that point of perfection. So early questions here for Cayce. Please give the important reincarnation of Adam in the world's history. He says in the beginning as Amilius. So Amilius is before Adam. He's pre-Adam. He's Amilius as Adam. And we're going to find a lot of this doubling going on when we look at this from a mystery point of view. Let's see if we can explain it as we go. As the first of the father that came as Amilius in the Atlantean land and allowed himself to be led in the ways of selfishness. So there's a suggestion that Amilius coming in and looking at all of these souls, I have a kind of a depiction of this. In the Cayce readings, there's this idea that souls enter physical matter too soon and they get caught up, and the Ahrimanic forces try to, along with the Luciferian forces, try to get them entrapped, and that they are using their abilities to create thought bodies and thought projections. And that when they get into these thought projections, they become subject to all these rules, like life and death, for example, which as spiritual beings, they're not subject to at all. So when we get into early stories like, Adam and Eve and all the rest of it, there's an echo here. We can kind of pick up on the essence of the echo. Let's look at a few depictions of Belial and Amilius. This is interesting. And I believe in Paradise Lost, some of these come from. This is actually the essence of Amilius looking down and seeing humanity trapped and trying to create an object, a vehicle, a way for them to move past the stage of being entrapped by these forces. And so when we look at Amilius in the way that he's doing this, he's kind of moving himself as the pattern. So what he needs to do is incarnate and take on the same types of pangs of sensual desires and all the rest that his comrades have done in order to show them a pattern for getting out of it. That is, you've gone into it, but this whole idea is you now have a new pattern and you can build out of it, just as you kind of got consumed by it. In Anthroposophy, I don't know if this will show up on camera, but there's a drawing of Manu, this painting, and again, Manu is Amilius for this study. Belial then shows up as Baal, Baal, in the Bible, but the original name in the Atlantean period is Belial, and the Sons of Belial are the group that dominate Atlantis eventually in this war with the Amilius group. What happens is that becomes the echo and the setup for, by the time you get to biblical times, they're still having this battle where you have, the kind of one God relation and worship going on through the Jews, and then you have all these other groups who are celebrating Baal. So the depictions of Baal very often show the human sacrifice rituals that are very, pervasive in the late Atlantean period. And you get all kinds of echoes of it when you go into the Mayan Aztec piece. They think they're going back to the Atlantean ways, but they're in fact using human sacrifice. A couple more from this. This is the Plato's depiction of Atlantis with the concentric circles of islands. I think that puts us in the kind of mentality of this. The early initiates, I believed, had a very different physical appearance from regular people. This is why when we get into RATA, as we're going to do here shortly, this is somebody who looked very differently. RATA is the high priest who took all the Amilius information and buried it in the Hall of Records. His appearance was very striking, according to the Cayce readings, and he became an Atlantean initiate, although originally he was from the mountains in Iran and came in with a group. There's a lot of strange things about RATA in the readings, including the fact that he does not have a human father, and it's not explained exactly then who his father is. But RATA will take that knowledge of Amilius and bury it in the Hall of Records there at the Giza Plateau. The depictions, some of these depictions, if you go pre-dynastic in Egypt, there's tons of things that are never put out in like National Geographic or whatever. This is one of them, and it shows this one going back like 4000 BC, before any pharaohs or anything. If you really look at this character, it's very unusual. He's different physically. Olivia has got the...
Wow.
And we know later...
Those are massive ears.
We're going to see Hathor and stuff in later times, and she's going to have a very unusual kind of cow appearance with the ears. But there's some significance to these. They're buried. There's a little back room at the Cairo Museum where they have a series of these things, which are just like, well, we don't know what this is, so we're just going to leave it off. I thought this was interesting. National Geographic put this one out. This was a mummy that was discovered from 2000 BC, and for once, the original paint was left on it. It hadn't decayed over time. And we see this very interesting blue kind of lapis paint on this early mummy. Some of these things coming forward, I think, from the studies are important. You might recall that, Kukulkan, we've done shows dealing with Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, and when we look at these figures, what we're getting in mystery terms is that these are high etheric beings. They're not physically incarnate, but they're communicating with these priests, and they're giving them instructions. Some of the figures are very beneficent. Other figures are incredibly sinister. And the Ahrimanic groups communicate with the priests and create all of this, we need to do human sacrifice and all the rest. This is another interesting picture of Kukulkan, and you get a lot of people on the ancient astronaut side who will look at this type of thing and just say, well, look at that gear, it looks like an astronaut or whatever. When they depict these things, in fact, they're showing etheric astral details of what is taking place. The person is encased inside of a strands of being, strands of action, strands of psychic communication. It has nothing to do with astronauts or anything like that. But I think it is important for us, in order for us to get a grasp of what these esoteric principles are about. When we look back at these ancient designs, we have to kind of lift ourselves up a little bit, almost a psychedelic vision of what they are, in fact, to inhabit them, as opposed to the kind of dry ancient aliens thing. Once in a while, just in terms of what they're looking at, it seems like they're looking at a UFO or something. But in fact, for the most part, I got to tell you, what we're looking at are people in an altered state of consciousness bringing information of what they can see in that visionary state. Yes.
World Change Brief says that was clearly a man wrapped in a snake.
Excellent point. Yes. And the snake of knowledge. Snakes have a lot of different principles, right? They shed their skin on one hand. Certain types of poisonous snakes can be deadly. There's the Kundalini snake, which is aroused during meditation. So it's a very heavily spiritual symbol. And if you were, this is the problem with the East and West traditions, which is in the East, they understand the snake very well from that perspective. In the West, because of the Adam and Eve story, the snakes are completely, evil serpents. And it doesn't go any further than that. That's a really good point. And going back to RATA, I want to mention a few things about him, because we're going to mention his history here as well. RATA will come with a group from these mountains in Iran, and they're an unusual group. He's part of a group. His mother is a daughter of Zu, Z-U, and he doesn't have a human father, as I mentioned. RATA is an early incarnation of Edgar Cayce. It's revealed at the end of Cayce's life, and he helps participate with Hermes in setting up the Giza Plateau. RATA is unusual in this sense, which is when he comes in with that group, they basically take over Egypt, and the king that is there doesn't want a battle, so he allows them to do it. And RATA becomes the spiritual leader, but he realizes that humanity is in such a position with Atlantis going down that he's going to spend years in Atlantis. Very often when people go back into this history on RATA, they'll say, oh, RATA the Atlantean. It's not true, actually. He's from that very kind of lofty, mountainous region between Iran and Russia. And he comes into Egypt, and then after rising to this position, because he's the mystic who leads this group, and some people have referred to the group as the Hyksos, but they're regarded in the Cayce readings as 900 people who came in around 10,550 BC into Egypt. So what happens, RATA rises to an important position and he decides, with everything happening in Atlantis, he's going to go with the initiates in Atlantis and study everything that they know. And he's there for 20 years. When he comes back, the Egypt, in part because of many Atlanteans coming in, immigrating in, is in a state of disarray. And what they've done is they've brought their slaves with them. Now, there's a lot of weird things about the Atlantean slaves. And again, I think in the Cayce readings, some of this is misunderstood. There's this whole thing about these thought bodies. Remember we were talking about these thought projections? Well, there's early indications that some of these thought bodies had offspring, and those offspring became sort of half man, half animal. And this is true. Now, in the Cayce readings, though, he talks about automatons, which is the word for robot back then. And what it looks like the Atlanteans had done, if you go deeper than just this idea of a thought projection, which doesn't really help us in the grand scheme of things. If you really think about the idea that the Atlanteans have slaves and they're automatons, they've kind of created their own clones to be slaves for them. And the problem is, since they are physical, they have the ability to be souls, but they're being blocked out of that. And what RATA does is he creates an entire temple, beautiful, to remove these, the kind of animal aspects from these hybrids that the Atlanteans have created on one hand. But I think it goes further, and I think it's very appropriate for the period that we're in, that he's dealing with androids. And the Atlanteans are bringing with them these automatons to be slaves. And this is causing very big upheaval when RATA comes back into Egypt, because you have all these advanced Atlanteans and they want to take over, in essence. And RATA has been working with the highly evolved Amilius group. So when the Belial people come in with their automatons, some of them half animal, some of them half mechanical, they basically downgrade the entire culture. And what happens is they set up RATA through a number of different things. And they say that he's trying to create the perfect human, and he's violating his own rules and all the rest of it. And RATA gets exiled to Ethiopia. And he spends 40 years in this exile. And what happens is there's a whole thing where he rejuvenates and he comes back and he's sort of young RATA again. He's regenerated in the Mount. And he comes back and he rules Egypt because they're in such disarray that they really want him to come back after 40 years. This is the whole epic saga of RATA. And RATA is very important, I think, for us as a study, because when he sets up the Giza Plateau, he does it with a mysterious figure that shows up from Atlantis named Hermes. And we get so much of Hermes in the Greeks, in the Egyptians, and all the rest of it, of course, the Hermes, the Hermetic tablets. So we have something very strange taking place there with RATA. And what he deposits under the Sphinx in 10,500 BC, according to Cayce, is the Hall of Records, which is the knowledge of all the Atlanteans and Amilius. And Amilius's pattern, which is, this is the pattern of Christ going through as Adam, as Amilius, and his many different reincarnations. Cayce will actually suggest that Christ is Joseph in the Bible, and that he is Zend, the father of Zoroaster. So he has all this influence on these different religious groups as we go forward. That's how we can understand and get into understanding the power and how important Amilius is. Unfortunately, Amilius is largely left out when we're considering these things, because, as I've pointed out in the Cayce readings, the crucial aspects, Amilius, the Two-Eye Stone, the Atlantean advanced technology, the understanding of the Great White Brotherhood, these things are kind of not promoted very heavily in the Cayce material. Very often there's like here's a workbook of ideals based on Edgar Cayce's thing, or here's a medical thing. But the deeper esoteric piece is sitting there. It's like, it's a piece sent from the mystery schools whole. And it's there for us to interact with and bring forward, or to leave, and move on to just looking at his medical stuff or things that maybe play better with the public. But I don't think the organization does a lot with his Atlantis and esoteric material based on the mystery schools. If they had, we'd be a lot further along, I think. I mean, they've done great work, don't get me wrong, but we'd be a lot further along with this, because Amilius is such a huge piece of the puzzle, and Amilius sets up the entire atom line, which is crucial for the development of spiritual humanity. Understanding Amilius is understanding the root of the entire mystery schools, what they're for, and also how the pattern started in the first place. Okay, we're going to move on from here, but yes, Miss Olivia.
Kat Goida wanted to know, so Atlantis predated the Anunnaki?
There's no question about that. The Annunaki period's about 6,000 BC, and the Atlantean period, we've already seen that in 50,000 BC. They're sending off death rays from central power plants, according to Cayce, to get rid of dinosaurs. All right, this is, we have to wrap our heads around it. We don't have history as it happened. There were advanced civilizations back there. They were advanced spiritually as well. The whole thing about the dinosaurs, it's very unsteady science on their end, traditional science, to say they were eliminated 65 million years ago. Doesn't seem likely somehow. There are, of course, these incredible depictions that aren't promoted very much, but of these Mayans playing and having kind of dinosaurs as pets and stuff. If you look for these things, I should have actually... So, there's something askew in the record, and this is why I think Andrew Carnegie, was so obsessed with any dinosaur find that he'd send a team there immediately. And of course, if you go to the Carnegie Museum, you're going to see two things: tons of Egyptian stuff and tons of dinosaur stuff. So certainly those groups understand on the inside. Yes, what do you got?
Sword Shopper Random says the Belial group is from Mars, according to the Melchizedek tradition.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. There's an origin of each planetary group represented on the Earth part. That's very obvious from the mystery tradition. Understanding it and how it works, it's so heavily shrouded in secrecy, because apparently if just anybody gets their hands on it, it's kind of a problem for the mystery schools. So that stuff is covered up heavily. We've cited before, and I did a show, I think it was 1.5 years ago, with Chi-Ji Young on the switch. It's on planetary seals, but it's on the switch of Mercury and Venus, which Steiner said Mercury and Venus were switched somewhere around the 10th century from how they were represented in the time of Pythagoras, for example. There's something deep. That's a deep mystery school secret, that these things have taken place. All right. Last week, we took a look at the Sun King imagery, and we went over Akhenaten and the strange shaped heads of him and Nefertiti and how they represented one of these groups. Akhenaten appears to be directly out of this Amilius line. Again, physically, there's something just a little bit different about them. And I think that this is a mark of coming from that Great White Brotherhood school. Their physical characteristics, they look, very human, but they're kind of a perfected style human. And there's something always a little bit off. Like the ears are very big or the head is big. And we don't understand why this is. More buried technology. Occasionally we'll see these. This is the very important wall art in the temples in Egypt that clearly depict high technology being used. But it's reserved. Again, what's happened is these people have gone through wars with this incredible, terrible crystal. So the priests, even though they have the technology, they're not sharing it with the public anymore. It goes underground. And we see little representations of it. And it might be the power base eventually of the pharaoh and the priests, but it's not for public dissemination anymore. And if the idea that, an evil pharaoh could get his hands on the two-eyed stone and destroy humanity again, they're not going for it. So the mystery schools maintain this tradition, which is why the Hall of Records and RATA's setup is so crucial. Of course, the classic stela there, and that is very clearly representative of advanced technology. I've studied this particular representation, and there's a big smear campaign put out by traditional academia on it, saying, "Oh, that's made up." No, it's there in Egypt. Egyptologists have studied it. It was actually hidden behind another ancient piece. The stone fell off and revealed this. This thing is already confirmed, and anything that's trying to say that, if you go into the background on it, the historians, the Egyptologists, etc., the museum people all agree that it's authentic. It's only this weird thing that's out there trying to discredit it, which has no basis at all. But it clearly shows a helicopter and other flying machines, and behind it, that incredible important symbol of the bee. And we've discussed the bee before, and in relation to the Sarmoon Brotherhood and that preservation of that deep knowledge, of course, the bee being right back here, and then there's the helicopter and the different flying machines. It's a crucial piece. We've got the snapshot there, and you can't unsee it when you actually take a look at it, because it kind of tells us everything that there is to know about the advanced technology that they had. That should already be a part of how we think about these cultures. The fact that it's not is ridiculous. So we exist in a kind of netherworld of, I guess they could have had technology, but, it doesn't look like they did. No, they clearly had the technology, and it's already been depicted. All right. Couple of quick things based on the Cayce readings, and then we're going to take questions in about 10 minutes. Is that
Okay.
right? Okay. This is from the Cayce reading 5748. What was the date and actual beginning and ending of the construction of the Great Pyramid? Cayce's answer: it was 100 years in construction, begun and completed in Ararat's time. That was the pharaoh of the period, with Hermes and Rata. Hermes, again, from Atlantis, probably an incarnation of Christ, in my opinion, based on these readings. What was the date BC of that period? 10,490 to 10,390 before the Prince, Christ, entered into Egypt. All right, so we've got, again, when you press Cayce for a date, he'll give it to you. That's the era. It's basically 10,500 BC. And it's 100 years in construction. And he talks about different periods of destruction in the three key periods of the dismantling of Atlantis, because it happens basically that 50,000 BC is the first eruption, based on the fact that they're misusing this death ray to try to kill these large animals. 28,000 BC, this is another incredible deep destruction, and the final destruction, 10,500 BC. All due to the misuse of the technology of the two-eye stone. It's not a comet, it's not a pole shift that destroys them, it's the misuse. He's very clear about that, even though I'm sure there were incredible challenges with the settling of the earth. They went through those challenges. You have to remember something. Cayce cites the Atlantis period as 200,000 years. So 200,000 BC, how many different things can happen during the course to 10,000? So it's 190,000 years. Certainly many, many different phases. All right, so let's just get a couple of things in on Amilius so that we understand who we're dealing with here. And I have to say, we have to understand that there's basically Amilius who sets the pattern and becomes Adam, and then Adam becomes Christ after a series of incarnations. So in asking about Amilius, this is what Cayce has to say. In the period then, some 198,000 years before the entry of Ram into India, which is said to be about 2000 BC. So we're talking 200,000 BC. There lived in this land of Atlantis one Amilius, who had first noted that of the separations of the beings as inhabited that portions of the earth's sphere or plane of those people into male and female as separate entities or individuals. This is the kind of crucial breakthrough that Amilius is bringing. He is somehow, just like the Adam and Eve story, they have this whole thing about the rib in the biblical Adam and Eve story. In fact, what it said is side. They're two sides, opposite halves. That's all it is. There's nothing about a rib at all. And it's the male side and the female side split before they're wrapped up in one being. This is the crucial kind of revelation that Amilius brings in, which is these beings that are trapped in the earth, they can't be brought forward out of it unless they have those two sides working together independently, the male and the female side. This is the kind of deep mystery doctrine on this. Okay. As to their forms in the physical sense, these were much rather in the nature of thought forms. Think about that. They're thought projections. They're not totally physical. They become physical, for sure. As to their forms in the physical sense, they were much rather in the nature of thought forms, or able to push out of themselves in that direction in which its development took shape in thought, much in the way and manner as the amoeba would in the waters of a stagnant bay or lake in the present. As these took form then by the gratifying of their own desire, for that as builded or added to material conditions, they became hardened or set, much in the form of the existent human body of the day, with that of the color that partook of its surroundings, much in the manner as the chameleon in the present. So basically, these etheric beings that are soon to be human, they come down and they project thought bodies. Then they inhabit the thought bodies, but get trapped in the physical environment. And they have to experience things, as we started the show off with, like life and death, and hunger and thirst and all these other things. But that's not how they were constructed originally. Now, here's a very interesting piece. These souls, there were then from the other worlds, the continuing entering of those that would make for keeping the balance as of the first purposes of the creative forces, see. And hence the second, or the continued entering of souls into that known as the Earth's plane during this period for that activity. So what he's saying is, as these souls are becoming hardened or trapped, these other groups are coming in from a higher place. He's saying other worlds, which is pretty tantalizing in light of the fact that, we know so much about the alien factor here. But I think what he's saying is they're coming in from a higher plane of existence to try to rescue their fellows. On the Sons of Belial, quote, the Sons of Belial were of one group, or of those that sought more the gratifying, the satisfying, the use of material things for self without thought or consideration as to the sources of such, nor the hardship in the experiences of others. In other words, as we would term it today, they were without a standard of morality. The other groups, those who followed the law of one, the Amilius group, had a standard. The Sons of Belial had no standard save self-aggrandizement. Okay, so what they end up doing is the Amilius group has developed this 2-eye technology. And what they've used it for is to interact with the saint realm. They're dealing directly with the spiritual realm. And that's how they've utilized the technology. What happens is the Belial group gets in on what they're doing, but they have the ability to say, we can utilize this for physical purposes. We can basically dominate the entire planet using the same technology. That is the clash. That's the original story of the Amilius group versus the Belial group in the Cayce readings. And it resonates so much today. And with that, Miss Olivia, I've got more, but let's go ahead with you.
You know, there's been this theory for a long time that sort of explaining that we live in a simulation, that this is actually virtual reality. And that's what I can't help but think of when you're describing this, is that, you know, and there could be layers of this. It does make sense that this is, I mean, what's real anyway? Aren't we just manifestations of God's consciousness?
This is the thought forms thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I find really interesting about that is when you get into the 19th century, all of a sudden, everything is about controlling your thoughts. And what I've heard about this in the kind of deeper spiritual literature is that the accumulation of thinking emanates so fastly into thought now that what you think is what happens. So they've been trying through these mystery traditions to leak out, basically, keep your thoughts positive, because the transmutation effect, the period that we're in of what you think to what becomes reality, is faster than it used to be for humanity. So really getting in on that, training your thoughts. There's a lot of clues in the mystery school work, whether it's Blavatsky or Steiner or Cayce or Gurdjieff, where, you know, for example, Cayce says, well, you have to understand, like, even the average person in that period was very conscious in ancient Egypt of things that were going on 8 miles above them. Now, that's a very different kind of consciousness than the thing that, you know, we possess currently. Maybe we could get there, but that's a pretty high consciousness ability. So those cultures, when we're walking around and looking at the different structures and things that they've done, or the advanced geometry that they use and things, they're naturally plugged in, and they're less dominated by this scientific materialism. That is the kind of hardening that's taking place in this era through the industrialization, and we're losing some of that kind of starry consciousness. So I think this is what they're pointing out. There's a way to tap back into that, to kind of recapture that for ourselves. Yes.
Luke Walker, are the Belial forces Ahrimanic and the Amilius forces Luciferic?
Oh, it's a good question. The Luciferic forces are a factor that hasn't been brought in much in this discussion. The Belial group is completely, you could transpose the name Ahriman for Belial. Those groups are exactly the same thing. The Luciferian group is different, and it's problematic because there's a piece of the Luciferic history, which is Lucifer. It's the gnosis, it's the knowledge for humanity. So those beings at times have had a beneficial effect on humanity, but they're not, again, they want to lure humanity away from the earth realm for their realm. So it's like kind of the eighth sphere situation with them as well. However, unlike the Ahrimanic groups and that whole astral group, the Ahrimanic group just wants to consume humanity. And in Steiner's work, it turned the world into a gigantic deep freeze, because that is the level that Ahriman exists on. He's heavy. And when it's interesting when Steiner describes tuning in to Ahriman, he starts to feel heavy, like he's in concrete, and that he can't spend too much time there. He'll just be trapped further and further in this weight. And so this is the heaviness of the materiality that emanates from Ahriman. The Luciferian part, which has had a great influence at time on the arts, for better or for worse, but it has a tendency to lure humanity's minds away. So it operates on a different level. So in the Steiner cosmology, the Ahrimanic group is really the the Satan group. And we still have to, it's not something to run away from, it's something to confront and come out of that confrontation as a larger spiritual force. But the Luciferian thing is a mixed influence, because humanity has gained a lot knowledge-wise, but again, there's this issue, this kind of imbalance, and the luring away of humanity. Yes.
State Wench 2, why do they want to capture us? If they don't, does their sphere die?
Yeah, they're harvesting humanity, so they live off humanity. And so if humanity moves on and becomes that true humanity that it should be, then they lose all their power. And their ability to kind of dazzle humanity, fool it, trick it, use it, all those things kind of go away if humanity advances, and their entire realm will basically collapse, because this is what they've learned to do, which is, humanity is their main treasure, and capturing humanity their main goal. It's interesting because all of these things, not to be too simplistic about it, but a lot of it comes down to the level of our own awareness, because we don't even become subject to forces like that unless our own awareness is dulled on a spiritual level. So if we've lost a little bit of our own spiritual awareness, we're far more subject to this force. It doesn't mean you can't get out of it. You certainly can. That's the whole point. Humanity every day, every hour, every moment has that ability to do it. It's innate. But they only have the ability, just like, the somnambulist under suggestion. If it wakes up, then the person giving the suggestion has no power anymore. It's exactly like that. Yes.
Okay, hang on. This is really good. Okay, so ShadowNet is asking, DJ, is this eighth sphere a form of spiritual hacking, subversion?
Yes. Actually, I like the term. We see the eighth sphere all the time. In fact, when you turn on music, or when you're watching something and they lay the commercials on you, you can feel the eighth sphere. It's just crept in. It exists to dull your senses to actual reality so that you don't think deep thoughts. In fact, it wants you on the superficial level of just kind of, getting caught up with sports or the Kardashians or whatever. And then your consciousness is dull, and then it has a heavier impact on a human being. We see it all the time. People who react to things, overreact to things. That's a purely Ahrimanic reflex action. And they're under the power of that emotional spell, right? They need something to get upset about. I know I've met a lot of people like this. And I think when you get right down to it, the entire culture is Ahrimanic. And so bringing forward Steiner's work on Ahriman can actually smash a lot of that, because so much of the Ahrimanic understanding from the Cayce perspective, from the Steiner's perspective, is scientific. So the 21st century, this is like the Ahrimanic playground, basically. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 110. We're going deep here on Amilius and RATA and the secret of the Ahrimanic force in all of this. We're taking your questions here with Miss Olivia. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That keeps us in touch with each other, and where everyone is getting thrown off social media, it's just beyond the kind of censorship that we could ever imagine in a supposedly free country. What we need to do is really develop those channels with each other. So let's make sure that you're signed up at darkjournalist.com. That's a free newsletter. If you want to get behind the program, you can feel free to subscribe to us and help our efforts there to bring you the kind of deep reporting that we're doing here. We're back to your questions.
Okay, I have more questions tonight than I've had in ages.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's stick with the eighth sphere. All right. So State Winch 2 wants to know, is the eighth sphere silicon based? Could the V change us using silicone chips?
I think the entire kind of gene therapy piece is all about stripping away the natural built-in ability to maintain spiritual sovereignty. I think there's a huge piece in there. And of course, Steiner warned about this, as we know, as we pointed out many times in the program. That's, just like controlling your thinking, controlling your physical ability to do things, to pass that blood-brain barrier and monkey around in there, to interfere with the physical expression of your pineal gland. These are the different things that are involved. And so the answer would be yes. The eighth sphere part in silicon is a little bit different because the eighth sphere has to be understood as a thought projection that becomes solidified as a sphere. And that if we can get drawn into that realm, in fact, what the Steiner work tells us is that the idea is that they want you to disappear into it. Let's think about that. Do you want to disappear into a virtual realm?
We already have. I mean, it's
Yes.
like plunging further, deeper.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So Dan Guzman said Steiner warned a jab would be made to damage the pineal gland to see the soul to prevent mankind from knowing God. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Well, I think we've touched on that heavily. And I think that they're using the scientific achievements on their side to create the conditions for an incarnation of this Ahrimanic piece. And again, they have to do it in a way that you don't suspect it. Because if you suspect it and you're aware of it, then it doesn't work. But we have to remember what the mystery schools have warned us of since 1840. They saw it coming, which was the scientific materialism would grow to separate our own understanding of our own spiritual nature. That was the goal. That's the Ahrimanic takeover of the institutions, etc. And, when we see so many groups at odds with each other, for example, someone can, write me all of these long things and think that they're justified about they hate Trump for this or that. It doesn't make any difference what how good that you can judge somebody. Somebody else can point out a series of other facts or whatever. The point is, in any of these groups, political or otherwise, who is upholding the Constitution? That's all that matters. So if somebody is trying to mandate you to do something, that's not constitutional. If they're trying to stifle free speech, that's not constitutional. That's all you have to see, whether it's right or left or whatever. So you and I don't need a discussion about any particular political figure. All you have to do is look at the scoreboard and who's following the Constitution and who isn't. Well, this other person's not following the Constitution, but they have a good reason because we're under deep threat. It's a deep threat. That's what George W. Bush said. Do you really want to line up with that? No, you don't let go of the Constitution. That's also a spiritualized document encoded, and it's a covenant with humanity. So that's a pretty easy scoreboard to see who's supporting free speech, not censoring it, who's supporting control of your own body, not insisting on mandates that take away that freedom. Who wants to call you a domestic terrorist for disagreeing with them? It's pretty obvious. You got these groups out there doing it. And the administration, the Biden administration, is one of the worst things we've ever seen, ever. So we're very, very deep in the soup now. And it doesn't matter if you're Green Party or Libertarian or Republican or whatever it is. this ain't it. The thing that we have up there, the Stepford Biden thing, is one of the worst representations. And, even media support, MSNBC and all this garbage. That's no way to go forward. So we're very clear on that. The question is, how do we step beyond the thinking of just one particular person, or I don't like this group, or this is why Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, when they studied the different wars like the Russian Revolution, came to the conclusion that the greatest enemy of humanity was mind control. And that's what we see over and over again. And it's very active, even in intelligent people, unfortunately. Yes.
Twilight Mist. So the eighth sphere is being formed. Some people report dreams that are like anime that they've seen, but real places they visit. It's eerie.
There's a lot of things there. We need a better understanding about the etheric body and the astral realm. These are things that theosophy and anthroposophy brought through. And then it seemed like, at a certain point, all of the understanding of those things goes awry. Like, where is now 100 years later a solid understanding about people, about, okay, this is the astral plane. That's where dreams take place, for example. That's where we see, dead relatives and things of this nature. The etheric body is more like the double of the physical body, and it's an energetic double of the body. And there's a way, when you have actually a physical ailment, to treat the physical body by treating the energetic body that encompasses that kind of aura of the body. So those are the things brought forward by the schools. How far have we gone with them in understanding that? Homeopathic medicine really deals with the etheric body. That's why it works. We have a great deal of information that's been put forward. I was thinking about Blavatsky's information that was brought up when I was reading The Secret Doctrine again recently. And I thought to myself, it's amazing, because here you can get this book for maybe $20 now. And there's a book that all that information, wasn't available before 1888. You just couldn't get it anywhere. So this is kind of how progress works. So that information is available. The next question becomes, what have we done with it? Have we tried to spend time understanding it? Have we worked with it? Have we developed a real good working solution of what the astral body is? Or is that just something that, some kind of like super marketed version is available about it, and everyone says, oh yeah, I'm in 5D or something, we have to kind of start to understand these things using fundamentals. And I think if you're interested in it, it can be a great value. And I think that it would be incredibly beneficial, the same way developing a talent for music, or a talent for languages, or a talent for artistry. It's the same kind of, you experience the same level of growth with it. Yes.
I was just thinking about martial arts, and how, for those of us who never took it, it's such a benefit, just being able to stand there while you're being attacked. It's kind of a metaphor, right? So that you're not afraid. You can stand in your power, not react,
Excellent point.
It's good training, right? Jack wants to know, Edgar Cayce was saying that what he was able to do, anybody can do. What is the technique? Do you know?
He gives the technique, in fact. Well, it's a little bit different than what he said. What he said actually is, I don't do anything you can't do if you're willing to pay the price to do it. Meaning you have to spend the time and energy and concentration and miss parts of your life. When Cayce was out in trance for 3 hours, his whole life would go by. He'd wake up. He'd done 3 hours for somebody else trying to help humanity out. This is crucial, I think. And he was on a mission. Of course, he'd been on a mission since he was RATA to bring this mystery information available out to the public, and he had a very kind of religious, spiritual background in this life. Now, here's what's interesting, which is Edgar Cayce, in fact, predicted that he and this RATA that was in his soul would come back and would reincarnate in 1998. And we see a lot of people claiming to be Cayce and saying, I'm a reincarnation of Cayce, and just having
Do you have that picture?
So horrible. We have, that's one of the worst things you can ever do. But what's interesting is it entirely ignores the fact that Cayce predicted that he would in fact return, which I'm going to read right now. And there's a very interesting key in there, which I believe suggests something in relation to the false UFO threat operation, oddly enough. So if that wasn't weird enough, I'm going to read this to you. And there's lots of X steganography in this as well. Get ready. Okay, here we go. So he's talking all about RATA and setting up the pyramids and what the Great Pyramid was laid out. The Great Pyramid, they asked him, does it contain any predictions? And he says, oh, yeah. And they say, well, how are the predictions set? How does one read them? And he said, well, it's actually in the geometry, and it's in the type of stones used and the angles and all the rest. And they said, well, how accurate would it be if you could, untangle it? And he said, it's as accurate down to identifying in history and for the future individuals down to the street name they would grow up on. So projecting the Great Pyramid is kind of a supercomputer there, telling humanity's past and future. Quite fascinating. And of course, RATA was crucial in setting it up. Here's the really kind of fascinating piece. And I'm going to read it all and then I'll break it down. He says, recorded in the pyramid, there are corrections. 1936 is a crucial year where he says the Earth starts spinning in a different direction, and it sets up all this stuff that's going on. As has been seen, there are periods regarding the predictions in the pyramid. There are periods when the year, place, day, country, nation, town, and individuals are pointed out. That's how correct are many of those prophecies as made. Let me read that again. These run from specific days, for as has been seen, there are periods when even the hour, day, year, place, country, nation, town, and individuals are pointed out. Think about that. How accurate is that? That's how correct are many of the prophecies as made. Oft there may be changes that bring periods, as seen in that period during which there was an alteration in that initiate in the land of Zu. Remember Zu. RATA's mother was a daughter of Zu. And Ra, that brought a change. Ra is RATA. But at a different point, because of being driven by those that were set as guides or guards of same. In the same Great Pyramid did the great initiate, the master, referring to Christ, Amilius again, take those last of the brotherhood degrees with John. It's John the Baptist, the forerunner of him at that place. So they took their vows in the Great Pyramid as part of the Essene Mystery School and then the Great White Brotherhood. As is indicated in that period where the entrance is shown to be in that land that was set apart as that promise to that peculiar peoples as were rejected, as is shown in that portion when there is the turning back from the raising up of Xerxes, Xerxes, as the deliverer from an unknown tongue or land. And again, is there seen that this occurs in the entrance of the Messiah in this period, 1998. This is very interesting. There's a lot to break down in there. And further on, he will say that the priest RATA will return in 1998. In fact, it would place RATA Cayce as a 23-year-old. And based on other information that I've seen, he would be a 23-year-old male in Utah. That's pretty interesting when you look at it like that. But let's go back to Xerxes for a minute. Let's read it close. As is indicated in that period where the entrance is shown to be in that land that was set apart as that promised to that peculiar people, as were rejected. That's obviously Israel. As is shown in that portion, when there is the turning back from the raising up of Xerxes as the deliverer from an unknown tongue or land. In that era, unknown tongues or land, there's a lot of them. In 1998, there's no unknown tongue or land. The only unknown tongue or land would be an off-world visitor. So this is a very kind of deep look at this reading. And the Xerxes part, again, the Xerxes being a Persian king is the name. He is using the turning back from Xerxes. Let's read that part again. The turning back from the raising up of Xerxes as the deliverer from an unknown tongue or land. And again, there is seen that this occurs the entrance of the Messiah in this period, 1998. There's something in 1998 that set everything else off on this weird tangent that we are on. And here we are 23 years later. And there's two very unusual pieces there. One is that he's talking about a deliverer showing up from an unknown tongue or land that can only be alien at this point. And then he's also referring to in 1998, RATA Cayce being reincarnated. And then, so in this period, he would be 23 years old and in America somewhere. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're on X Series episode 110. Whew, we're going deep. Now we're taking your questions. We're going to do some more of that. Miss Olivia.
So I guess a lot of people think Xerxes is Obama. I think there's some sort of meme out there.
Interesting. Okay.
World Change Brief says the rejected people could be Mormon, not Israelites, because Utah.
True. Really true. And the Mormon thing is very interesting from a lot of different perspectives. Here's a real problem with the Mormon part. The Mormon faith is actually based on a very deep understanding of space and aliens. There's no question about that. And there's a large Pleiadian influence on the Mormon religion, in my opinion. And I've got that from study, but also from working with people who work on the psychic side. But here's the thing. Mormons would never accept the experimental injection according to their religion. So what's going on there? How is that all working out? Well, we know that the Central Intelligence Agency tried to infiltrate and control the Mormon church. What's going on there? What's happening? I would like some Mormons to tell me how they see the experimental injection aspect. Why don't you ever hear numbers about, you hear numbers about everything, They're like, hey, 86 of garbage collectors, 86% are on board with I don't believe any of those numbers. I actually think it's incredibly small, maybe 30% of anybody. But what about the Mormons? What about the Mormons in relation to this? I have not seen one story in relation to the Mormons and this incredible biofascist aspect. What's going on there? We're going to have to explode that one big time. Excellent point, though, bringing in the Mormons. And, the reincarnation thing, it's hard to say.
Right, it's fun.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say is that Cayce had predicted himself when he would return. So the idea of somebody else coming out and saying, hey, I was born in 1960, whatever, and I'm Edgar Cayce, is just dumb. Because Cayce himself said, well, I'm returning in 1998. So they have their story upside down. One of the interesting things that Edgar Cayce told me was that from the beginning of the ARE, the plague of the ARE, were people coming up to him and saying, one, I'm John the Baptist reincarnated, and two, I'm your dad reincarnated. And, we know, of course, the Gaia push on that with Wilcock and all the rest of it was just ridiculous. But you have people out there who do this stupid stuff. And he apparently harassed the ARE to try to get them to support him. And Edgar Evans was like, I don't feel any connection with the guy at all. And of course, what's interesting to me is that, these people who pirate the narratives over and over again, somebody's going to come out and swear that they're Steiner reincarnated. I know that that's coming. And they're going to be like, accept me, I did it. And then the next thing will be, they'll take the Corey Good line about, hey, I'm also, the inner earth princesses are giving me an oil bath. Mm-hmm. The oil bath is coming. Okay, you're up.
David Turbina, DJ, is Cayce saying that the Great Pyramids are actually a kind of timeline observatory, which gave the mystery schools all the information about the past and future?
Yes. How would they be able to do that? But they were. How did this work? He says, he makes the point of how accurate the Great Pyramids are in terms of their predictions. And that if we have the ability to study them and understand them, we can understand all of the moves and changes in the spiritual thought of humanity and its destiny. It's embedded in it. And one of the things when we learn about the materials made to build the Great Pyramid is that we're dealing with granite. And when I talked extensively with Joseph Farrell about this, of course, who has some incredible theories around the pyramid, of course, granite is crystal. So it's embedded as a kind of gigantic memory chip on one hand, but it has the ability somehow to predict events and people down to the street name. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I don't know if we've really spent enough time investigating it properly. The mystery schools put it out there. How's the investigation on that one going? Europe.
So on that note, Gypsy Moon says, could the crystals in the granite in the Great Pyramid be the storage for all the data in the Hall of Records?
Yeah. This makes sense to me. One of the things that Cayce said was in the Hall of Records is the entire construction ability for the Two-Eye Stone. That's why the CIA spent time infiltrating the ARE, the Cayce Foundation, trying to get more information about the Hall of Records under the Sphinx. And that record is declassified. 1964, they had their own agents undercover at the ARE trying to get more information on this. You know how the ARE, they're pretty gullible. They probably would have given it to them anyway, like, here's the whole file. And we'll actually pay you to go dig. Because they're very open-minded, and they've worked with a lot of people who are sketchy, like Zahi Hawass. One of the things I wanted to point out is that it is Mark Lehner who was at the time dating. He was a high school dropout. It was like a hippie, and he was dating Hewlin Cayce's daughter. And Hewlin Cayce decided, I'm going to put everything behind this guy. And he got him a university degree. Cayce Foundation sponsored him and everything. And he wrote a book, which is The Egyptian Heritage, which is a very fascinating book. It's from 1975. This guy went on to be the #1 debunker of anything Cayce associated with the Giza Plateau. It's like, no, all the dates are like 2500 BC. That's it. He just became the establishment guy. Something very weird about this guy being embedded in the middle of that, and also the fact that the Cayce Foundation had put Zahi Hawass through school as well. They had given him a big grant, university grant, and then he became the guy who controlled the Giza Plateau and kicked everybody out, kicked Graham Hancock out. and those people just took it over, no question those governments were looking for the two-eye stone information. And whether or not they ever got it, the Cayce readings suggest it's actually, they're kind of sentinels energetically there. So they're not going to be able to get it that way. They might try. But quite fascinating. Mark Lehner, Lehner, very unusual figure in the middle of that Egyptological picture. Yes.
Shamanist Anamkara, could the predicted ice age we are possibly seeing in the near future be related to the dominance of Ahriman in current affairs? I love this question.
I was just thinking Lehner's office is only like 10 minutes from here. So
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's at Cambridge. His stuff is in Cambridge, interestingly enough. Okay. The ice question. There's an interesting thing. However we take it on the Ahrimanic side, there's something about Steiner's experience tuning in to this Ahriman figure in order to create that incredible sculpture of Ahriman's face. And as he's doing it, he's feeling very heavy, and his own movements become heavy. And he feels like if he stays in that state much longer, he's going to become solidified. So I often think about what they talk about with nuclear winter and how nuclear winter would certainly suit Ahriman quite well. In terms of the Ice Age, it's pretty literal, but yes, I think it's the same idea. There's something about the lack of life in that heaviness. And I think we need to understand that, the spiritual light breaking through to humanity is, as we know, light. Think of all those NDEs that we hear about where the people just feel like, oh, I'm as light as a feather and I'm surrounded by all of this incredible light and spiritual energy. There's something dense about the earth plane anyway, but to think of the lower level of that, this Ahrimanic, deep, heavy astral level is even a lot worse. Yes.
Twilight Mist. The Ahrimanic realm being heavy and slow, cold, puts a whole new spin on the phrase winter is coming.
It does.
I think there's a lot of, I don't even want to say predictive programming, but, in Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
I've always said that the end is AI taking over.
Yes.
As Bran Stark. That is, he can't have children. He is sort of omniscient, and that's what they're setting us up for.
Wow, is that something? They went pretty deep with that series. There's no question about it. They also, pandered a lot, so it lost a lot of the importance that it's set out to have. But there's definitely predictive programming in the Hunger Games, in Game of Thrones. Some of the things that broke through, like the Matrix, the original Matrix movie, you wonder about, just like you wonder the JFK movie, how did these things break through? But that aspect was still available. Is it still available in 2021? It's available right here on this show with you in the Ideas Room, with us talking about it. The breakthrough is available with us. I don't know about popular media. I don't know about movies and music and what is available, and if the amount of things that they're allowed to bring forward at this point. I don't think so. I think that they're being locked down heavily. And if they step out of bounds, I think they're blacklisted forever. I think this is one of the worst periods. It's much worse than McCarthyism because they have incredible technology to track any of us, our associates, our thoughts, our emails, everything that we've collected. Speaking of Utah, is at a huge center in Bluffdale, Utah. So any email you've ever sent, any text message you've ever sent, it's all there waiting in case they get a technology at a certain point to just say, you know what? Back in 2011, you said such and such. That makes you a Nazi. This is where they're going. So that whole system has to be purged from the earth. And the only way to do it is through good leadership or pole shift. It's going to be one of the two, neck and neck. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're deep, deep in the soup tonight. Esoterically, and it feels just right, doesn't it? It's X Series 110 Amilius and the RATA Atlantean secret. There's more on Amilius to bring forward. I might have to do another episode including that, but we're taking your questions now. Yes.
I can tell you what you need to do an episode on is Mormons. And we've talked about this before, but as far as the ideas room goes, that's what people want to hear about.
I love the Mormon religion. I love the Joseph Smith story. I've always been impressed with the Mormons I've met. I've always been very interested in how the CIA targeted the Mormons. I have such deep sources on it, some of the deepest, that, you know, I would love to see that whole thing explode, and I would love to see the Mormon thing come out. But I want to show a couple of quick pictures before we go anywhere. This is, of course, Madame Blavatsky surrounded by the Ascended Masters. Now I think we understand the Ascended Masters just a little bit better than what we were speaking of, because we talked about Steiner and perfecting that astral body to be able to take it up and interact in human affairs at any time. Of course, the symbol of the Ankh, this points directly back to Amilius. In fact, it is the echo of Amilius in Egyptian culture, meaning eternal life. And I think that the Ankh symbol and all of the intense representatives, holy representatives holding it, is crucial. In the last episode we did on the Sun King, we had that image of George Ellery Hale under the Akhenaten sun symbol for Aten there at Caltech. And I've been going deeper on this, but there's going to be more revelations about Caltech and Akhenaten. A little sneak preview there. And look, it's RATA again. Okay, I'll show them again.
Love that picture.
Absolutely. And of course, I have this large version of this picture right here in the studio. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know what I look at, that's there. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep, deep, deep on this one, and we're taking a couple more of your questions, and then we're going to call it a very interesting pre-Columbus Day. Look, he's got the 8th sphere on his head. Yes.
Najat Madri. Could there have been multiple Christs in that 200,000 year time period to evolve man's consciousness?
Yes. The Christ force moves, according to the Cayce Readings, through Melchizedek, who's a mysterious priest in Salem there early in the Bible. But he's also Enoch. And if you check out Enoch or Melchizedek, they don't really die. It just seems like, you know, they go off into the mount. Moses at the end of his life, you know, off into the mount. Elijah. And Moses and Elijah were not incarnations of Jesus, according to Cayce. So here in a snapshot is the kind of mystery school version of the esoteric Christ, which is the soul Jesus perfected itself to such a point so that the solar archangel Christ could inhabit it for 3 years in a ministry here on earth for the first time that had ever happened, that an archangel solar being became the savior of humanity through the mystery of the crucifixion at Golgotha. Now, so Jesus is individuated from Christ. It is Jesus perfects himself to a level, but the Christ force has been there all the way through. And this soul, Jesus, is Adam and Joseph and Joshua. And he's also Asaph, which I find very interesting, which is a musician in the King David story. Mm. But there's an indication that he's Akhenaten as well, but he doesn't come right out and say it. And what's also interesting is there's an indication in the Cayce readings that it was Joseph who had an influence on Akhenaten. So this is very interesting, because if it's true that Jesus was Joseph, then if in fact it were true that Joseph was the influence on Akhenaten, they would cancel each other out. However, the days are apparently different, the dates. So it's very hard to track when Joseph was there exactly and when Akhenaten was there. We have an indication that Akhenaten was there about 1350 BC. But again, when you're dealing with that dating system, the Egyptologists moved everything around to fit their version. They did that in the 19th century. Well, they didn't have access to all this technology to track it. So Egyptology exists on the most scant information that they were able to drag out. If they were really open-minded and went back, then you'd probably bring that traditional timeline of dynastic Egypt closer to the Cayce timeline, 10,500 BC, and you'd be able to overlap those. I'm going to tell you another strange thing in relation to this, which is when we talk about Zoroaster and some of these figures. Well, Cayce has Zoroaster in 7500 BC. Traditional history has him in 500 BC. How do you account for the 7,000-year difference? There's something very interesting, which is a being as a tradition of a being. That is, this being lives to a certain period of time and then transfers his consciousness into another physical vehicle. It's not straight up reincarnation. It is actual transference of these beings. RATA doesn't have a human father in the story. So who is his father? Is he a being who, gets to a certain level and then the consciousness is transferred into this kind of, they have a way of doing this kind of virgin birth? It's very unusual. Of course, those who are interested, and obviously the UFO alien aspect comes in here, because that wouldn't be a human father either. So there's something going on in relation to what they're telling us there. But how do you get 7,500 BC in the Cayce readings for Zoroaster and 500 for Zoroaster? How do we get these incredible differences in years? I'll read you something even very, very strange in the same vein, which is when speaking now about, I think I have this here. When speaking, this is quite unusual. Cayce references that in 10,500,000 years ago, there were 133 million souls in the world.
How many?
133 million.
Okay.
Now, here's what's interesting about this. Traditionally, there are no humans around in that period. And they kind of have us, the version, they have Neanderthal man like 20,000 BC or, so these, the very old strands that they have for humanity don't go anywhere near that period. So we have a lot of things that are just taken for granted that they just told us that just don't make any sense at all when you get right down to it. Let's see here. Yeah. This is pretty good. Okay. I'm just going to include this. During those periods when there were the first of the activities of the peoples in the lands which now represent a portion of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah, the entity was among those who made for the associations with those influenced from the great powers or nations through those influences by the activities in Egypt, the Gobi, and Og, which is what they called South America in that period, cooperated in one great cause. The entity then, as a leader among the peoples for alleviating of man's influence upon that created by man in the enormous animals that had lost control by the influences of the powers of suggestion in the associations of spirit, the sons of men upon the animal world. This is such a deep piece. Cayce's saying 50,000 BC, here's a group, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, portion of Arizona. they get together with groups from Egypt, the Gobi, and South America and cooperate in one great cause. Again, it's this death ray to get rid of these dinosaurs. But then here's the kicker. The entity as a leader among those peoples for the alleviating of man's influence upon that created by man and the enormous animals. Wait a minute. The enormous animals are created by man? So he's saying here, basically, this is a scientific experiment that got out of control. They've got gigantic animals, and they had lost control by the influences of the powers of suggestion in the associations of the spirit or sons of men upon the animal world. Basically, scientists in this period are dealing with dinosaurs, and they've created them. So, we've got a Jurassic Park 50,000 BC style taking place here. Think about that. And also, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. Now, look, we take the Cayce readings on a deep level because of his level of accuracy and because so many things that he's brought forward have come true and been shown to be true. If this is true, that in those places, in the Gobi Desert, in South America, and Egypt, they were getting together with people in New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah in 50,000 BCs, trying to get rid of these Jurassic animals that had been created or recreated by humanity. How different is the actual story of humanity in actuality from the thing that we've been told? Is this the reason why someone like Andrew Carnegie would be so obsessed with any development of the dinosaur story? What does that mean? Where does that take us? It takes us to a strange place, 50,000 BC, when Atlantis and all these other places got together to get rid of dinosaur menace. Yes.
Craftomatic says, in those states, so many dinosaur fossils are found.
Hey, that's a really good point. Yes, absolutely. And we know that the Four Corners certainly have been above ocean for a long, long time. Yes.
I'm going to throw this out here. So I had a ghost experience once where I woke up in the middle of the night many years ago, shot up. Like I knew there was a presence in the room and there, feeling like a person, and there was no one there. And it was very malevolent, and I could feel it.
Oh.
And I immediately started praying so that it would go away. And it persisted. It was still there. I couldn't get rid of it. And I asked basically my angels, why isn't this working? And they communicated to me telepathically, you're still too curious about it. You, as soon as you really want it to go, it'll go. So I shifted my consciousness and I said, yeah, I'm not curious. I want it to go. And it did. It left very quickly.
Wow.
And I'm thinking about, I often get insights when I'm here in the ideas room. And, people are asking questions about how we can kind of avoid our dark fate, right? Ultimately, underneath all of this time that we are presented with, and there's a lot of fear around it. And I can't help but think that part of us, like it's a game, like a story, like a movie, is still a little too curious about how this is going to play out. And so we're in the story, we're attached to the story, to the drama, to the tragedy, to the fear, to the pain, to the suffering, whatever it is. And that ultimately what we need to do is liberate ourselves. If we really want to avoid the fear and the pain and the suffering, I think we can. But do we want to let go of all that? Because some part of us loves being in this crazy movie, this simulation, this experience. It's just something to think about.
I think at this point, a lot of people would like to be let out.
I think they would. Well, this is the question that I'm leading up to, is atonement, worthiness, and mercy, and how they play into all this. And what do we need to do practically, spiritually, consciousness wise? Do we need to give up certain things, almost like Lent? like Lenten sacrifice. So to prove
right.
to ourselves that we
What
are
we
worthy
willing
of,
to give up?
well,
Huh?
yeah, for discipline, so that we don't have any subconscious tapes playing that somehow we don't deserve God's mercy, that we deserve what's coming to us. If that we built this fate for ourselves, if we are to sort of, I hate to say it, but sort of bargain with God and say, no, we deserve something better than what we are being presented with here, to be slaves to the elites, then don't we need to show our worthiness, prove our worthiness, even to our own subconscious?
Yes, absolutely. That's
What would
really
Cayce
good.
say about all this?
Well, he always goes back to the individual, always. And there's all kinds of unusual stories in the Bible, of course. Even in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, in the end, they're looking for 10 good men, right, to save the whole city. That's very unusual. They just came out with a story finding a major explosive piece in the Sodom and Gomorrah remains. And they're like, maybe it was a comet or whatever. But it's overwhelming that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a real story. And again, when I was growing up, like Jim Baker and all those scandals, Jerry Falwell and all that. Who was the other one? The really major guy. It's not Falwell.
Don't ask me.
Wasn't he like Jerry Lee Lewis's cousin? I forget his name. Jerry, it's not Falwell, because Falwell's kind of the tubby guy. Then there was Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, which they're trying to make a joke out of now. Swaggart. Jimmy Swaggart. That was really an intense one. This guy was quite a performer. But I remember being a kid and dealing with this stuff. One of the things, now that you said Swaggart, I completely forgot what the point was. But yes, we've had our ups and downs on that side of things. And that's the too simple of spirituality, right? Where it's like, just send your money in. And now they have this incredible guy now. He's like, God wants me to have limousines or whatever. There's always that incredibly dark side to it. And this is the thing. And so a lot of people with Sodom and Gomorrah, it's ha ha ha. And yet the impact of the story, and also the bargaining with the spiritual forces and the angels that show up, who are like, we've come here to kind of check things out. And the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah really want to interact with these angels. They want them, they want to have them in their orgy or whatever. And the angels are basically like, at a certain point, Lot says, look, leave these angels alone. You can have my daughters, but leave these angels alone. And the Sodomites are like, no, we want those angels. And the angels strike them all blind. That's the story. What ability, to have them all go blind, what kind of ability do these agents who come down and check things out? They're coming down to visit with Lot and check things out. Like, how are we going to, sort of put an end to this terrible experiment? So you can look at it at a straight religious level, of course, and which I think is a good thing to do. And if so, then it shows something dramatic, which is there's the ability to change conditions based on the quality of the people in a given place. And that, whether it's, Australia under captivity right now, captured by an enemy force, probably, in all likelihood, from everything I've seen, it's the Davos crowd behind the Chinese Communist Party that's coming in to control Australia. There's no question about it, just like with Canada. Can the quality of those people expose the leadership? It's definitely, they definitely have the ability to do that. And we all, directing our thoughts in that direction, have the ability to see that happen as well. Okay, everyone, we're going to take 2 more questions. Excellent point, Miss Olivia, and fantastic questions there tonight. as well. I want to remind you all to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our free newsletter that keeps us in touch. We're going to need to be in touch, obviously, as things go forward, and the incredible censorship, the weight of that censorship coming down. But if you make sure that you're signed up there, we can keep track of each other, and basically just send you a newsletter once a week about what we have coming up. And by the way, some incredible shows that we have coming up for you. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Okay, I want to make sure I fit this in. Ruth A wanted to know, what is a good place to read about Vulcan and New Jupiter?
Well, certainly the Steiner, An Outline of Occult Science, is really where you're going to find that. I always recommend Cosmic Memory for understanding the Atlantis Vulcan part. And that certainly is one of the best. And I also recommend, I want to put a plug in here for Gigi Young's series on kings in suspended animation and the Arthurian piece that she's picked up on with that. Highly recommend it. Check out Gigi Young's YouTube channel or gigiyoung.com for that. Very, very interesting stuff. One of those dropped today, and it's very interesting. Yes.
David Tormina. So DJ, do you suspect that Tesla went public with his ideas about the death ray in order to get the concept out to the public more than actually building one?
Fantastic point. It's an interesting and crucial thing that you brought up, because Tesla, in fact, never winds up building it, and supposedly they never want him to build it, which seems highly unlikely. So there's something strange about him bringing the death ray into the conversation at all. And also, we know there's a series of things, for example, his press conference relating to receiving an alien signal, which also has a flavor of that. He's raising the awareness around this in a stealthy fashion. And also, he's been a target of J.P. Morgan and others. So he's been around the block. He knows how to do this now, and he's older and wiser. And it certainly does get him an incredible amount of press in that period. And I think it does open up the public's eyes to a certain degree. It's very strange because the death ray aspect that the Atlanteans hold it, there are echoes of it. Even, we brought up Archimedes tonight, but it's like that story, they understood that this was the beginning of how things went poorly in Atlantis. And, just like the attuning the two-eye stone too high, it becomes the lesson then. It becomes the thing not to do. And so that technology disappears underneath the waves of the mystery schools, but those schools maintain not only the character of how to reconstruct it, but the knowledge of how it's been used. So, that is the crucial realization around it. But Tesla, he's right on. We don't even understand, I think, the level that he's right on the X technology. He's got it. He understands it. And from hearing how he speaks, you can certainly find that out. Yes.
Kontiki Man, quick follow-up. Why did Tesla bring that up in 1934?
Well, there was great concern about the rise of Hitler. I think that's the public explanation. However, we had the Berlin Olympics in 1936, where basically the reporters were partying with the Nazis. So I think it's interesting. I think 34 is a crucial year. The 30s, absolutely, just each year has this interesting impact coming back. And also, the election of FDR, coming out of the Depression, the Cayce readings, all of the Bimini Cayce readings come from the 30s. There's one earlier one from 27, but I think the impact of the decade is just off the charts. And of course, Hitler's growth, and then finally World War II by the end of it. But in 1936, there's a series of world affairs readings, and I recommend people go back to the Cayce work to read these, because it seems like he's writing the headlines for World War II in 1936. But what he says is that in 1936, the Earth's position changes in space. He counts it from 36. So he gives us a few setups, and he relates it to the Great Pyramid and what the Great Pyramid predicts. But he gives us a few rock-solid dates. 1936, 58 to 98 is the period that he sees as a testing period. And then 2001, there's a new cycle that begins. And then 2100 is another date that he gives, where this actually comes from a reading dream, which is an interesting thing. When he was doing his readings, he would also have his own dreams, which is pretty fascinating. And in this dream, he had been born again in Nebraska, and he was 7 years old, and the family's name was a strange one. And everywhere he saw these flying cigar-shaped ships, and these scientists came. They realized that he was Cayce reincarnated. They took him aboard the cigar-shaped ship, and they took him to New York. And New York was completely destroyed. And he asked a construction worker, "Where am I?" And the guy said, "New York City." And he was just looking around, and it was decimated. And the other thing that he remembered from the dream was when he was looking down from the cigar-shaped ship, that all the houses were made of glass, and that Nebraska was on the coast. Whew. Oh, let's put those together. Yes.
I'm going to make you go 10 more minutes. Michael Snow, did the theosophists of the day believe Tesla was their guide to advance humanity's consciousness?
There's no question. There's a series of episodes where we've addressed these little kind of background angel funders for Keely and Tesla. And if you really look at the groove of those interactions, you will find them deeply, deeply associated with archaeology in Florida. So, and I have one of the huge texts that they came out of this period, and this book is like such an incredible overview of this Floridian archaeology and some of the really unique things we've shown. I'm trying to think of the number of the episode, but we've shown some of the things that came from that. There's no question that those were fleeing Atlanteans who came directly to Florida. But yes, would be the answer. There were these angels in the background who were on the theosophical side, and they were from America, but they had moved to London, and they were supporting both Keely and Tesla. Keely is supported not just by Helena Blavatsky in her book. She has a chapter, by the way, in The Secret Doctrine, as I mentioned. That's pretty heavy duty. She's not talking about anybody else on that level. But Steiner does the same thing. And he says he has a psychic technology. There's a story of Keely demonstrating it for the military. And he has a plane that can go 500 miles an hour, or flying machine that can do that. But this is 1890. So then we get the Wright brothers launched from the Cosmos Club, which we've done a series of episodes on. And they get the kind of, that's flight, right? They invented flight. The Wright brothers were living in the Cosmos Club. I mean, this is a lot of controlled messaging going on. There's something in relation to flight, which goes beyond just the political and economic impacts. And it reminds me very much of the story of Lindbergh, who also is associated with this archaeological piece, more in the Yucatan. That's what he did, by the way, in his spare time, as he went looking for ruins over Yucatan. But there he is going across the Atlantic. And what is he hearing? All these voices start talking to him in midair, disembodied voices talking to him. Someone said Bloomfield Moore, exactly. David Termine. Thank you very much. So there's something in relation to flight. Again, just like the Nazca lines, looking down and seeing the patterns. There's something about our consciousness when we get up there. I'll reveal something kind of interesting, which is I feel more natural in a plane than I do almost anywhere. I know a lot of people, I have a family member who's terrified of planes, has to do everything he can to keep it together on a plane. But I feel very in my element. Yes.
Okay, so World Change Brief wants to know, can you sum up Amilius in Atlantis? I'm not sure what it was. We've been all over the place tonight, but it might be a good idea.
Amilius is the first, one who brings the spiritual light to Atlantis. So Atlantis was chaotic because these groups had projected themselves into thought bodies, and they had intermingled with natural elements like trees, animals, and other things. But there's something else going on there too. Especially as we see later, he talks about them creating these beasts through suggestion. Does that mean with their minds they can look at a thing and suggest that it come into action? This is the power of the Atlanteans, something I think we need to understand. But Amilius has a mission that he sees his peers, humanity, trapped, having projected themselves into the earth. So he comes down with a mission to create a pattern form, a perfected human body that they can emulate in the pattern, physical, mental, spiritual, to get out. So he becomes Adam to do this. There are other humans before Adam, but they're not this Adamic line which can lead humanity out. So Amilius becomes very important and crucial and largely overlooked figure, but he's the one that Cayce points to as 200,000 BC. He's the one who separates the sexes in order for the pattern to be complete, man and woman to move forward, to be able to spiritually evolve, even under the circumstances of getting trapped in matter. So Amilius is a very important key piece for us to understand, and then his legacy is maintained by RATA, an early incarnation of Cayce, who doesn't have a human father. And that's what's in the Hall of Records, is the legacy of Amilius in Atlantis. Amilius goes on to become Jesus. So that Atlantis story is part of the awakening of humanity. This is why we start to get some of it back through the mystery schools. And that by the 1960s or 70s, Atlantis is kind of everywhere. We're going to see a lot of disinformation around Atlantis as that consciousness starts to kick up. And I can tell from the people from the ideas room and people who write me that there's a lot of understanding about Atlantis and its significance. So it's hard to keep a good idea down on that level, especially something as powerful for all of humanity, much bigger in my opinion than any kind of UFO disclosure, especially from Lou and the CIA. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Okay, 2 more questions. Fantastic ideas from tonight. Olivia, great stuff from
Very
you
intense.
as well. And I want to remind you that we'll be coming back on Friday, this Friday, in our regular slot with the show. And I don't know, the Boston Marathon tomorrow.
Fingers crossed.
Well, it's just, yeah, especially for traffic. Okay, you're up.
Okay. So Sodom and Gomorrah is a great topic. and there's a lot of interest in it.
Oh,
Jack
yes.
wants to. So, are the people from Sodom and Gomorrah in today's days? Are all the governments in the world, Hollywood perhaps? And Godwin says most people don't know that it was not the ritual raping and murder of people in Sodom and Gomorrah. It was the genetic alterations that the fallen used. Those same fallen have been here the whole time.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd have to hear more about that. I'll tell you, Sodom and Gomorrah is a strange story. You don't see anything else quite like it. You know, like when the Egyptians are severely out of line and you have this incredible, like, you know, locusts and the plague of hail and all this stuff. But they don't get nuked. I mean, getting nuked is a pretty big deal. So total destruction, it's got an echo of the Atlantis story in it, does it not? And again, there's a lot of real evidence that this took place. So Sodom and Gomorrah not only is an incredible allegory, it's a phenomenal historical boost to the biblical text. Okay, before your last question, I've got something for everyone. Just to let you know that this stuff every once in a while, these stories get out, and there's something mystical happening all the time with Egyptian artifacts. Here's one. The mystery of the spinning statuette. Okay, I'll read you this. This is a key story here. Most Egyptologists are not superstitious people. When I first noticed that one of our Middle Kingdom statuettes had been spun around 180 degrees to face the back of the case it was in our new Ancient Worlds galleries, I wondered who had changed the object's position without telling me. The Egyptians themselves would have appreciated the concern to make it visible for passers-by. The text on the back pillar was a prayer for offerings for the deceased. Yet the next time I looked into the case, the statue was facing in another direction. And a day later, in another orientation. None of the other objects in the display had moved. The case was locked, and I have the only key.
Wow.
The statuette had always intrigued me. It entered the Manchester collection in 1933 as part of the donation of 5 objects from Miss Annie of Bolton, 3 of which at one time were considered to be modern forgeries. The inscription on the back pillar read, "An offering which the king gives to Osiris, Lord of Life, that may give a voice offering consisting of bread, beer, oxen, and fowl for Ka, the spirit." As is known for other statues of this date and type, the man's name was Nebsal, Nebsenul, Nebsal, is inscribed on the front of the statuette's base. He bears what Alan Gardner called an obscure title. Distribution of the inscription suggests the statuette was prefabricated with the standard offering formula on the back pillar, and that man's name was added later to the base. Logical attempts to explain the statue's movements center on subtle vibrations caused by outside traffic causing imperceptible movement. Lil, a colleague on the other visitors' staff, suggested that perhaps the man wanted us to say the prayer for him. Yet when this text is visible, his name is impossible to read. What is very strange is that the statue has spun in a perfect circle. It has wobbled off any particular direction. The intriguing suggestion that the statuette was carved of steatite and then fired may imply that it's vulnerable to magnetic forces. But if so, why did it not move on the glass shelf in pretty much the same position in the old Egyptian afterlife exhibit gallery?
Far out.
Is someone playing a trick? I doubt it. The simplest solution seems to be to apply a tiny amount of museum wax to the base to stop the movement. But what if the statue continues to keep moving? What would be our explanation then? And that's the picture. Yeah.
So this just happened?
Yeah, the story is from September, but pretty unusual.
That reminds me a little bit of the Vampire Lestat.
How?
Right? Wasn't there a statue, a mummy or something?
Those who must be
Yes.
kept. Yes, very true. I've heard a lot of weird stories about statues changing, moving, and that museum staff at the Cairo Museum get a lot of weird, like tons of paranormal. Um, some real poltergeist going on there, Egyptian poltergeist. But I thought you'd like that one.
Pretty
Okay.
cool.
One
Well,
more.
I'll say, I think anybody who's prayed, particularly in a Catholic church, with Mary and whatnot, that, there's sort of an egregore that is built within statues.
Yes.
So when I've certainly had that experience, that there is a real presence within the statue when people project all of this emotion on the statue, and that you feel like it is watching, that it's looking at you, and that it might even move in your peripheral vision.
Interesting. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's a spiritual interaction with material objects. And we know that, for example, they'd have blessed objects that could deliver a healing for people, or even somebody having the photograph of a saint, for example. So there's something at work there. Absolutely fascinating. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's episode 110. This is Amilius in the HotZone, the RATA Atlantis secret. And we are going to take the last question now from Miss Olivia.
Oh, it's a big one. Okay. So Nick Malone wants to know, who is programming us?
Well, I don't know. I'll tell you this, though, which is, when you see a lot of people take, for example, the media and how it shapes people, and with its suggestion of absolutely asinine things, not using any logic or science or anything, and all the rest. And you think, how incredibly stupid, and people are being stupid for accepting it. And you think to yourself, how is it that people could be like this and so suggestible? But then you really go deep to try to answer this. Somehow at the station, the place that we're at in our development, we have to be malleable. And the thing is, are the better groups going to help with that molding, or are we going to be under the suggestion and control of these darker groups? That's going to be the real question. But we have to be malleable. And it's interesting because in an explanation about why Madame Blavatsky, with all of her incredible psychic knowledge, could be taken, many times she was taken. She got bamboozled, swindled out of a house once. And Steiner said, he had a very interesting explanation. He said, I'm going to put it to you straight, which is, the actual head of a mystic is softer than the average person. And the average person with a harder head, literally, actually physically harder, is able to thwart, what would be typical human lies, or someone trying to swindle them. But in order to have that perfect interpenetrability that a psychic mystic who's on a mission to serve humanity needs to have, their brain, their actual head matter has to be soft, so that they can't allow themselves to have that quick guard there up that would help them in a situation where someone's trying to swindle them. So I feel like all of these things are active in the world that we're talking about now, and that in some cases, some of those people who are falling for the propaganda, and it's having it's either having or it will have a bad effect on their lives. There's something about them which will come to the fore, and that there's something about the honesty of humanity that is admirable. But we also have to admit that we're under siege by groups, especially at a high level in the government, who are willing to use every form of deception in order to capture and harvest humanity at this period. So we have to do our absolute best to overcome that. And like Blavatsky, once in a while, we're going to get swindled. There's no question about it. But hopefully we can keep it to an absolute minimum. And I'm going to leave you with this. Of course, we talked a lot about death rays tonight. I've tried to convince Olivia. I've told her that we could make a version of this movie, Death Ray 2000, but you're going to have to like adopt the 70s look. That's
is that
all
Farrah?
It certainly looks like her, doesn't
What
it?
year is that?
I think it's a Farrah lookalike. It's
78?
79.
79?
I can definitely.
Disco era?
I think I can take on this guy's thing. He's got kind of a Burt Convy haircut,
Yeah,
but
I
could do that.
I like the shiny buttons.
It's Death Ray 2000, everybody. You know you're going to want to watch it. And the sequel's coming soon from a Dark Journalist production. A couple of things I forgot to do. I didn't get into the alien part, so I'll just show you the pictures. Okay, there's Junior. That's Betty Hill's alien, of course. Her sculpture. That's her arm on sculpture. Here's another alien, King George, and Thomas Jefferson, and oh, forget it. Never mind. Then let's see, we got here. Oh yeah, let's not leave Lamb out. Lamb is the first gray. He wins, and of course, you got your backup gray. This is what a typical alien, gray alien, actually looks like. So it's funny when we compare that with Betty Hill's alien. In fact, Olivia, when you get right down to it, they don't look anything like each other, do they? Except that they're both bald.
Yeah, I mean, look at the brow ridge on Junior, right? Much more human looking.
These are different. She didn't meet a gray.
No, it doesn't seem like it.
She met some kind of a human offshoot, it seems like. Fascinating. And of course, we leave you with the aliens tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be back on Friday. Have a great Columbus Day.
I have many people to thank. And first thing is, when is part 2 with Ilana Freeland coming out?
That is coming out, and it's going to be for subscribers. There's a edited video coming out this week.
Okay. All right. So let me thank Gil and Joy R, Spuds McKenzie, Kelly Green, Jason Black 008, Bill Gomez, Roper Overbearing, Shazam, I am L. Mays, Occult Fan, Bell, Ruth A., Eurythmia's Fun, Shanjak, N plus Fold, Brian Berner, Thomasine Richards, Jim Sarge 31D, Luke Walker, Bubble Dancing, Down the Range, and Brandon Kramer. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. We really appreciate it. It makes all the difference, of course. And thank you for your support tonight and for all our subscribers. Really thank you for keeping us going to deliver you these reports. And we're going to have many more exciting shows for you and some events even coming up here as we get to the end of the year. So we'll be back on Friday. Enjoy tomorrow as a holiday, Columbus Day, whatever you want to call it. And Miss Olivia, you get the last word.
I'm starving. Let's go.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to do a couple of quick shout outs, actually. And gummy bears. That's good. I like that one. DJ JB. Excellent. Scarlet Fire. It's great to see you. Golden Girl. Luke Walker. Tamara. Gigi Abbey. Chrissy. It's great to see you, Chrissy. Golden Girl. I said that one already. Shazam. Esoteric Gold. Can't beat that. Plan B. Bo Rip, Eminem Matthews, Danielle Jorgensen. This is a great crowd in the ideas room tonight. We had a rowdy thing. We came in on a Saturday night. We did a weird night, and it was pretty wild. Shamaness Anamkara, chorus, great to see you all. Hey, it's Olivia Wings Girl. Hey, you're in stereo. Jennifer and Bucks, World Change. Najat, it's great to see you. Red in the Valley, Max Lupo. Excellent. Professor Hugh Axton. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us, Professor. Brady Renee, morning, afternoon headshot. I like it. Sam 3. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you all next week. And remember, it says end broadcast, but after all...
Hey, don't I get the last word?
Oh, I thought you did already.
Usually you turn to me and say last word.
I did.
Let's go, Brandon.
Oh, right. That was the best. Unbelievable. Brenda Fisher. Shane Perry. Woo. Mad Fingers. Anything like Goldfinger. He loves gold. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much. We
God
love
bless.
you.